إعلان مهم. 重要提示
Important announcement.
Message important.
Важное объявление.
Anuncio importante.
يرجى من المتحدثين الكرام إلقاء بياناتهم بسرعة معقولة لضمان ترجمة فورية وافية وعالية الجودة.
为了帮助口译准确完整传递发言信息，请代表发言时语速不要过快。
Speakers are kindly reminded to deliver their statements at a reasonable pace to ensure complete and quality interpretation.
Il est rappelé aux orateurs qu'ils doivent présenter leur déclaration à un rythme raisonnable afin de garantir une interprétation complète et de qualité.
Напоминаем ораторам, что для того, чтобы устный перевод был полным и качественным, необходимо выступать в умеренном темпе.
Se ruega a los oradores que pronuncien sus declaraciones a un ritmo razonable para garantizar una interpretación íntegra y de calidad.
Excellences, distingués collègues, je déclare ouvert.
Excellencies, distinguished colleagues, I declare open the third meeting of the 60th session of the Human Rights Council. We will continue our enhanced interactive dialogue on the human rights situation in Afghanistan. And we continue with the list of speakers of national human rights institutions and non-governmental organizations. And I give the floor to Women's International League for Peace and Freedom by video statement.
The Special Rapporteur's upcoming report on the impacts of funding cuts on civil society and NGOs working in and on Afghanistan. Afghan women activists, feminist groups, and women-led organizations have been among the hardest hit, despite already operating with minimal resources and under immense pressure, and now facing closure due to donor withdrawal. These organizations are vital to the survival, dignity, and agency of Afghan women and girls. We urge member states and donors to urgently restore, increase, and sustain flexible funding for women's civil society. We remain deeply concerned over the worsening violations of women's rights in Afghanistan. Since the Taliban takeover, Afghan women have been systematically erased from public life, facing policies that amount to gender persecution and apartheid. We echo the CEDAW Committee's call to dismantle these discrimination systems and urge the international community to treat these violations not only as women's rights issues but as crimes under international law. We also reiterate the call for an independent accountability mechanism to complement the Special Rapporteur's mandate. Addressing impunity, advancing accountability, and supporting victims' rights to justice, truth, and reparation is essential. Only by centering Afghan women in policy, funding, and diplomacy can the international community help reclaim rights, dismantle gender apartheid, and rebuild peace. Thank you.
Merci, je donne la parole à
Thank you. I give the floor to Marjorie.
Mr. President, Special Rapporteur, Deputy High Commissioner, and distinguished delegates, good morning. The Gender Persecution in Afghanistan Accountability Working Group and the Afghanistan LGBTIQ+ organization ALO welcome the UN High Commissioner's report, while encouraging him to call further attention to widespread anti-LGBTQ rights violations in Afghanistan. August 2025 marked 4 years since the fall of Afghanistan's government. The Taliban has not ceased its systematic persecution of women, girls, and LGBTIQ+ people. They are subjected to arbitrary detention, sexual violence, torture, and systematic denial of other fundamental rights. These abuses amount to crime against humanity of gender persecution, underscored by the International Criminal Court's recent arrest warrants against 2 Taliban leaders. A devastating earthquake in Afghanistan took countless lives and affected women and girls disproportionately due to the Taliban's discriminatory gender policies. Meanwhile, Iran and Pakistan are subjecting Afghans to mass deportations. Therefore, we have the following recommendations. 1. Ensure the renewal and full resourcing of the mandate of the UN Special Rapporteur on Afghanistan so he can continue his crucial work. 2. We urgently call this Council to establish an independent and comprehensive international investigative mechanism to document past and ongoing crimes against women, girls, and LGBTIQ+ people. And 3. Support the International Criminal Court's recent efforts to hold the Taliban accountable and initiative to bring Afghanistan before the International Court of Justice for rights violations. I thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to Afghanistan Democracy and Development Organization.
Thank you, Mr. President. 4 years after the Taliban seize of power, Afghanistan remains one of the most repressive countries in the world. Afghan women and girls face a system of institutionalized discrimination and gender apartheid. They are denied access to education, excluded from employment and public life. The Global Torture Index reveals alarming patterns of arbitrary detention, torture, and ill treatment in Afghanistan. Human rights defenders, journalists, former officials, and minorities are particularly at risk. We are deeply concerned by the forced return of more than 2 million Afghan refugees from Iran and Pakistan this year, including unaccompanied minors, children, women, and others at high risk of persecution. These forced returns violate the principle of non-refoulement. People in provinces such as Kunar, Nangarhar, and beyond suffer the impacts of recent earthquakes with their urgent humanitarian needs unmet, especially for women and girls. This highlights the need for international support and vital role of women's education and employment, as female doctors and professionals are essential to saving lives in emergencies. We also urge this Council to establish an independent accountability mechanism to investigate past and ongoing violations, and end impunity. I thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to United Nations Watch.
Mr. President, we express condolences to the families of 2,000 victims who perished in the earthquake last week in Afghanistan. This tragedy was only made worse by what happened next. Rescue workers applying Taliban rules refused to help trapped and injured women and girls, some of them bleeding. They were left under the rubble. 4 years after seizing power, the Taliban continues to trample basic human rights of its own people. Women are banned from speaking or showing their faces. Human rights activists, journalists, teachers have faced enforced disappearances, torture, and summary executions. And now into this torment, the Islamic Republic of Iran has, since June, expelled 700,000 Afghan refugees, violently rounding them up. Humiliated from its war with Israel, Tehran is seeking a scapegoat and accuses Afghan refugees of being spies. Many are beaten. They threw us out like garbage, said Sahar, a mother of 5. Already this year, Iran has expelled 1.8 million refugees. That's why we brought Afghan activists here, Husna and Dr. Masouda Jalal, Nila Ibrahimi, Zarifa Ghaffar, to sound the alarm. But where is the rest of the world? Where are the mass rallies in London, Paris, and Madrid for suffering Afghan women and girls? Where are the campus protests for 1.8 million Muslim refugees expelled by Iran? Why is the UN Secretary General silent? And we ask this Human Rights Council, why are you now planning to elect, by acclamation on October 8th, a representative of the Islamic Republic of Iran?
Thank you. I give the floor to Human Rights Watch.
Mr. President, for the past 4 years, the Taliban have intensified their attacks on the rights of women and girls in Afghanistan. The Taliban's widespread and systematic assault on women's and girls' rights constitute the crimes against humanity of gender persecution, which UN experts have labeled gender apartheid. These severe restrictions have expanded to freedom of movement and expression, further curtailing women's civil, political, economic, social, and cultural rights. As the Taliban deepen their repression, the Human Rights Council urgently needs to establish an independent and comprehensive accountability mechanism, distinct yet complementary to the work of the Special Rapporteur, with a mandate to investigate past and ongoing abuses, including Taliban crimes against women and girls. Afghan women continue to resist the attacks on their rights, and we should stand with them in solidarity with concrete actions. An accountability mechanism would be a vital tool in addressing the entrenched impunity at the heart of Afghanistan's human rights crisis, advancing access to justice, truth, and reparation for victims of abuses. It could also have an important deterrent effect. As another year passes with girls denied their right to education, this Council cannot wait any longer to act. We urge the Council to establish a robust, comprehensive accountability mechanism this session. Thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to Civicus.
Mr. President, first and foremost, we express our sincere condolences with the victims of Afghanistan after the devastating earthquake, which adds to the country's long-standing humanitarian struggles. We are also deeply concerned by the systematic erosion of fundamental freedoms in Afghanistan under Taliban's 4-year rule, a decline that led to a total closure of civic space. This closure has resulted in no room for CSO, activists, and journalists to operate independently or safely. HRDs and journalists face constant harassment, arbitrary detention, torture, and enforced disappearance by the de facto authorities. Independent media outlets have been raided and shut down. Women and girls have been completely excluded from the public life, tantamount to gender apartheid, while activists and journalists deported from Pakistan face a significant risk of prosecution by the Taliban. Civicus supports efforts by the International Criminal Court to prosecute 2 of the Taliban's top leaders for crimes against humanity, and calls by civil society and the UN Special Rapporteur to establish an independent accountability mechanism with a comprehensive mandate to address grave abuses and international crimes. We call on this Council to urgently strengthen monitoring and reporting on human rights violations in Afghanistan, provide protection for Afghan civil society, especially women, human rights defenders at risk, and support efforts to ensure accountability for serious crimes by the Taliban. We also urge states to fully support renewing the Special Rapporteur's mandate. We thank you.
Merci. C'était la dernière.
Thank you. And this is the last statement that we could accommodate. I will now give the floor to the panelists for their final comments. You have 3 minutes each. I now give the floor to Ms. Zubaida Akbar by a video message.
Let's be clear. Afghan women have not stopped resisting. Every day in protests in underground schools and hidden community spaces, they are standing up to Taliban's brutality. They are risking their lives for freedom, for education, for dignity. They are proving that Afghanistan is not a lost cause. So I ask you, if Afghan women refuse to give up, how dare the world gives up on them? This is not the time for empty statements or cautious diplomacy. This is the time for action. The Taliban is not a government, it's a terrorist group unwilling and incapable of governance, and in total defiance of every human rights principle we claim to uphold. To normalize them is to betray Afghan women and everything you stand for. Stand with Afghan women as your partners in shaping Afghanistan's future. Do not sideline us. Do not silence us. The women of Afghanistan are showing more bravery than most governments. They are demanding accountability when the world looks away. We are carrying a vision for an inclusive, forward-looking Afghanistan, while the Taliban drags the country backwards. So I leave you with this. If Afghan women are prepared to risk everything, then the least that the international community can do is fund their community-based civic activities and amplify their demands. Your governments can offer them protection from Taliban's targeted attacks and refuse to hand their future to a group that has already destroyed so much. Thank you.
Merci, Madame Mariam.
Thank you, Ms. Mariam Safi. You have the floor.
Thank you, and good morning. In response to questions on accountability for Taliban crimes and ensuring women's participation in all discussions on Afghanistan, I would like to present the following recommendations to you. First, Afghanistan cannot wait. I urge this Council to heed the call from civil society and establish, without delay, an independent investigative mechanism. Such a body would coordinate evidence gathering, strengthen accountability, and bring Afghans closer to justice. Second, in September of 2024, Canada, Germany, Australia, and Netherlands announced ICJ proceedings against Afghanistan for CEDAW violations. This was a groundbreaking step. But this action must not fade into the background. States must press for transparency, follow through, and the inclusion of Afghan women and civil society in every stage of this process. Support for the codification and the prosecution of gender apartheid as a crime under international law is a must. Afghan women are living proof of how systematic subjugation can be weaponized against half of the population. We must match rhetoric with action. The resilience of Afghan women is the strongest challenge to the Taliban's totalitarian vision, yet they remain underfunded and undersupported. The international community must increase its direct funding for Afghan women and civil society organizations operating in the country. And this includes frontline defenders of democracy and human rights. Excellencies, I know global crises are multiplying. Attention is divided, and domestic pressures are very high. But the Taliban have a 100-year plan, while the international community has a 6-month plan at best. If we do not act strategically and collectively, we risk losing more than Afghanistan. We risk losing the global fight against authoritarianism, and we risk accelerating the current rollback in human rights and women's rights that we are witnessing worldwide. Thank you.
Merci, Monsieur l'Ambassadeur.
Thank you, Ambassador, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I once again thank and appreciate the words of sympathy, condolences coming from the member states and also the international organizations for the victims of devastating earthquake in eastern Afghanistan. Mr. President, as the discussions showed, and also the testimonies of my colleagues from Afghanistan, that this Council must recognize the current crisis is not new or isolated. It is the latest phase in a decade-long cycle of impunity compounded by the Taliban's radical ideology and sustained disregard for human dignity. Each failure to ensure accountability has fueled new cycle of repression, atrocity crimes, and human rights abuses. For Afghanistan, lasting peace and genuine reconciliation will remain impossible unless justice is addressed holistically. And we have experienced this post 9/11 in Afghanistan. So, regardless of the parties to the conflict or their affiliation, justice needs to be delivered. Just days ago, the largest coalition of over 100 Afghanistan's national and international civil society organizations issued an open letter to this council calling for the establishment of an independent investigative mechanism for Afghanistan. This demand must not be ignored. Mr. President, on behalf of the people of Afghanistan, we urge this council to act decisively on number one, establish a dedicated independent investigative and accountability mechanism for Afghanistan, mandated to investigate, collect, preserve evidence of crime committed by all parties past and present. Number two, to ensure support for the victim-centered and intersectional initiatives, ensuring that the voices of survivors are at the core of accountability process. Number three, we appreciate the tireless and effective work done by SR Richard Bennett and his team, and we urge this council for providing him with the enablers to continue this important mandate. Mr. President, the people of Afghanistan cannot afford another cycle of violence. Justice and accountability are not optional. They are the only path to restoring dignity, preventing recurrence, and building a future free of oppressions. And I thank you very much, Mr. President.
Thank you, Ambassador. Madam Nala Haidar, you have the floor, please.
Thank you, President. In trying to answer some of the questions that were raised yesterday, I see two tracks. I see the longer-term track with a mechanism that will probably take time first to be constituted, then to be effective. But there is an urgency, in my view, that we cannot afford to wait only until we have a mechanism to act. So my proposal is, let's look at what we have now. We have an all-tools approach in which we have concluding observation of the recent dialogue we had with Afghanistan that has a menu of recommendations that are very substantive to all stakeholders, not only to the de facto authorities, but very much so to the international community. And yesterday, listening to the intervention of different states, I thought about all this bilateral assistance that continue to flow into Afghanistan. How much of this is linking their support to concrete improvement in women's rights? Is this happening? This is one of the tools that one can use, conditionality of aid and putting pressure. Then there is another also issue, the issue of the Doha process. So it struck me that why can't we use more this process to impose, in a way, the presence, participation of women in that process? That will also help immensely. And also the OIC role in bringing all the experience of other countries that are managed under Islamic law and the status of women. I think we're lacking a lot these linkages, and I really believe that bilateral assistance that would be much more linked to the improvement of the status of women is one effective tool. That the issue of any forum that is organized to have a dialogue with the Taliban that would include women from within Afghanistan and hopefully one day also from the diaspora, that the continuous support of civil society, as was mentioned also by some of them, that donors continue. These are the lifeline of women in Afghanistan, the civil society work and the resilience of these women that continue to have classrooms in the underground and continue to struggle to remain human. I think they deserve a little bit more in terms of assistance financially for them and protection, as well as the UN. Some questions were asked. The UN is doing a great job on the ground, but it is also needs a little bit more of internal, coming together internally, because I think that the effort remains somehow scattered. I wouldn't say in silo in Afghanistan, but somehow scattered. So I propose really that CEDAW becomes a little bit central to this process with the concluding observation that is a real tool that call on Afghanistan to abide by its obligations. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Special Rapporteur. Richard, over to you, please.
President, many thanks, and thanks to states and NGOs for your interventions, several of which asked me about what can be done to challenge Taliban's policies, ensure accountability, support my mandate, and most importantly, support the people of Afghanistan. I'll continue my responses during side events today and tomorrow if you wish to join. But before I address these, I wish to denounce the US government's sanctions on the Special Rapporteur on the occupied Palestinian territories. Sanctioning a Special Rapporteur appointed by the Human Rights Council violates international law and is a direct attack on the integrity of the UN human rights system, including special procedures. Addressing my mandate, unfortunately, I'm compelled to report once again that I'm unable to fulfill my full responsibilities due to lack of resources to support me. Despite this Council's repeated adoption of resolutions increasing resources in the context of the liquidity crisis, the support I receive is no different than when I took up the mandate 3 years ago. While I continue to discharge my mandate to the best of my ability, its full potential has not and cannot be realized in the current situation. Many interventions have rightly expressed concern about the situation in Afghanistan. However, 4 years after the Taliban regime seized power, statements of concern are not enough. Alone, they will not improve the situation nor counter the growing frustration and dismay I increasingly hear from Afghans inside the country and in exile. More than words, they need action. This includes greater support for civil society, and particularly women-led organizations. States should commit to long-term funding of organizations working on many issues, including human rights documentation, protection, humanitarian assistance, education, particularly for women and girls, health, service delivery, legal assistance, demining, those working in the media and the arts. Of course, no single action will resolve the crisis, which is why we need an all-tools approach. However, accountability is and must be a central part of the strategy. While it cannot erase the past, it can help chart a new future, one that's drawn by the people of Afghanistan. And as I've said before, it includes action by this Council during the session to establish an independent and complementary investigative mechanism. The people of Afghanistan's determination is the compass which will lead to justice and dignity, and through their courage, they are already leading the way. As an international community, it's imperative that we stand by them, not just in words, but also in deeds. I thank you, Mr. President.
Merci. J'invite maintenant la...
Thank you. I would now invite the Deputy High Commissioner for Human Rights to make a final comment.
Some questions arose yesterday about what approach is most likely to lead to concrete change on the ground. And let me reiterate, our office continues to advocate for a comprehensive approach that combines sustained monitoring and reporting, engagement with the authorities through dialogue, as well as the pursuit of accountability through both judicial and non-judicial measures. As we heard very graphically, the human rights situation in Afghanistan is complex and requires not only an all-tools approach, as the Special Rapporteur has been advocating, but also an all-actor approach. The international community must work to fulfill the economic, social, and cultural rights of all Afghans through the forms of assistance that can support humanitarian needs and material living conditions on the ground without discrimination or exclusion. We also need to find ways, as you have heard the plea, to support the crucial work of civil society organizations and others that are working towards creating space for women and girls, minorities, and other groups that are facing severe discrimination. Independent mechanisms, such as those created for the situations for Syria and Myanmar, as well as investigative bodies, such as commissions of inquiry and fact-finding missions, can and do play an important supportive function in ensuring that perpetrators are held to account. They can ensure that evidence is gathered and preserved in accordance with international standards, ensuring that this information is not lost or destroyed and remains available for use in future accountability processes. But as we know, the path to justice and international accountability can be long and does not yield immediate results for victims and survivors who have very pressing, urgent needs. Any further mechanism is ultimately a question for the members of the Human Rights Council. And of course, given the extensive nature of the violations and the abuses, we agree this has to be well-resourced and properly equipped. That will need to be carefully evaluated in light of the currently constrained resource environment and the need to ensure full complementarity with existing mechanisms. Meanwhile, let me assure, we will continue our work on the ground through UNAMA's Human Rights Service despite the challenging situation. And by that I mean monitoring and documenting a range of human rights violations, including regarding the rights of women and girls, engaging with the de facto authorities on these issues through, for example, meeting with the de facto security agencies on individual cases of violations, accessing prisons to meet detainees, and publishing public reports. They are the only international human rights monitoring presence on the ground. That presence is crucial, and we, as an office, are committed to pursuing and upholding human rights protections and accountability for the people of Afghanistan. Thank you, President.
Merci beaucoup. Nous arrivons.
Thank you very much. And thus we have come to the end of this enhanced interactive dialogue. I would like to thank the Deputy High Commissioner as well as all speakers for their participation. We will now have a brief technical pause before beginning the interactive dialogue on the report of the fact-finding mission for Sudan. Thank you.
Distingués collègues, nous allons...
Distinguished colleagues, we shall now proceed with our interactive dialogue with the fact-finding mission on Sudan, pursuant to Resolution 57.2 of the Council. I'm honoured to welcome the members of the fact-finding mission, Mr. Mohammed Chande Osman, its chair, Ms. Joy Ngozi Azelo, and Ms. Mona Rishmawi. The speakers list will be closed in 15 minutes. I'd like to give the floor now to Mr. Mohammed Chande Osman to introduce his report.
Distinguished delegates, I have the honor to present on behalf of the Independent International Fact-Finding Mission for the Sudan the findings of our last report. Sudan is enduring a war of atrocities. Civilians are not only caught in the crossfire, they are being deliberately targeted, displaced, and starved. Both the Rapid Support Forces, RSF, and the Sudanese Armed Forces, SAF, and their respective allies have committed war crimes. In the case of RSF, many acts rise to the level of crimes against humanity, including persecution and extermination. Our report focuses on the impact of the conflict on civilians and on infrastructure indispensable for their survival. From the outset of the siege of Al-Fasher in May 2024, the city and surrounding camps have been relentlessly shelled. Over 450,000 people have been displaced. The RSF specially targeted displaced camps, particularly Abu Shuk and Zamzam, where survivors described how hundreds, possibly more than 1,000, were killed. Entire sections of the camp were burned, and over 400,000 people were displaced once again. Both sides committed reprisals. On 20th of October 2024, the RSF attacked East Jazeera after a commander defected to SAF. Over 30 towns and villages were ransacked, with hundreds reportedly killed, beaten, and raped. The SAF too carried out reprisals. After retaking parts of Jazeera in January 2025, SAF allied forces attacked the Kanabi community, killing dozens and burning homes. Verified videos from Khartoum and Omdurman show how men in army uniform executing civilians suspected of supporting the RSF. Both sides carried out arbitrary detentions, torture, and inhuman treatment. Survivors from SAF RSF sites described slaughterhouses where dozens died from beatings and starvations. Victims from SAF facilities recounted electric shocks, sexualized torture, and conditions so overcrowded that detainees had to sleep standing. Sexual and gender-based violence have been a defining feature of the war. The mission documented rape, gang rape, sexual slavery, abduction, and forced marriages by RSF fighters, often targeting non-Arab women and girls, some as young as 12. There is also evidence of SAF committing sexual violence, particularly in detention centers. These are deliberate strategies. The mission concludes that both parties committed war crimes, and RSF attacks on civilians also amounted to crimes against humanity, including murder, persecution, forced displacement, torture, rape, and sexual slavery. Excellencies, the war is destroying not only lives, but also the means of survival. Hospital, markets, water and electricity systems, and humanitarian convoys have been systematically attacked. Markets, the backbone of food access, have been repeatedly bombed, and in October 2024, SAF airstrikes in El Koma market killed at least 45 civilians. 2 months later, Kapkabia market was struck, killing more than 100. In March this year, SAF bombed Tora market during peak hours, killing and injuring hundreds. The RSF too shelled markets, pillaged entire areas, and destroyed Zamzam camp's market. RSF drones hit the Moroe Dam and water towers, leaving communities without drinking water. The head system has been disseminated. The RSF repeatedly struck Al Junaibi Hospital until it closed. In January 2025, a drone strike on Al Saudi Maternity Hospital killed 170 and destroyed its emergency ward. Less than 1 in 4 health facilities remain operational in the worst heat-affected areas. Medical personnel have also been targeted. At least 159 health workers have been killed, threatened, or arrested, or abducted. In Zamzam, RSS fighters shot 9 relief staff in April 2025. 2 later died. Ambulances have also been attacked while transporting patients. More than 84 Sudanese humanitarian workers have been killed since the war began. In June this year, a joint WFP and UNICEF convoy, clearly marked with emblem, was struck by drones after being stopped by the RSF. 5 aid workers were killed and food supplies destroyed. The result is one of the gravest hunger emergencies in modern history. Nearly 25 million people, half of Sudanese population, face acute food insecurity. In camps such as Zamzam and Abu Shuk, children are dying of malnutrition and dehydration. These are not accidental harms. In the case of SAF, they reflect failure to minimize civilian casualties. In the case of RSF, they are part of a deliberate strategy to drive civilians of essentials of survival. Some of these acts amount to war crimes of starvation. Combined depreciation of food and medicine and obstruction of humanitarian assistance may also amount to crime against humanity of extermination. Excellencies, the Sudanese people have endured atrocities for decades while perpetrators have enjoyed impunity. This cycle must stop. We have listened to hundreds of victims and witnesses. They want justice, but Sudan remains unwilling and unable to deliver impartial justice. Both SAF and RSF deny responsibility. Victims and survivors have no confidence in national institutions, and international action is therefore indispensable. The mission recommends a roadmap grounded in 4 pillars. First, the parties must stop the fighting, protect civilians, lift sieges, allow humanitarian access, halt sexual violence. 2, states and international communities should enforce the arms embargo, increase humanitarian aid, back peace efforts, support the ICC, establish an international mechanism, exercise universal jurisdiction, and impose targeted sanctions. 3, mediators should facilitate inclusive peace processes that embed justice. 4, civil society must continue to document violation, support victims, and lay the foundation of an inclusive, right-respecting Sudan. Excellencies, the international community has the tools and must demonstrate political will. Every day of delay costs lives. The people of Sudan deserve not sympathy but action, justice, protection, and a future free of violence. Thank you very much.
Merci. Conformément à notre...
Thank you. In line with our habitual practice, we'll start by hearing from the delegation of the concerned country. I'd like to give the floor to the distinguished representative of Sudan. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you, President. I'd like to thank Ambassador Jürg Lauber for his wise leadership of the proceedings of the Council and for all the accommodations that enabled my delegation to participate in this session. I would like to insist that our participation does not undermine Sudan's position regarding resolutions 54/7 and 57/2, but the idea is for us to participate as a member here to exhibit what we've been achieving at the judicial level. Mr. President, the rebellion by the RSF terrorist militia is an internal affair, and it requires the respect for the sovereignty of the state and non-interference in our affairs, while ensuring that the judicial apparatus can guarantee fair trial, and it is able, willing, qualified, and has integrity and independence. President, there has been over 130,000 lawsuits registered, 366 among them against affiliates with the formal forces, 647 have been dropped during investigations. Over 4,900 have been referred to national courts, and nearly 2,000 have received a verdict. There have been grave violations that have been observed by the terrorist militia against women, children, girls. This included sexual violence, and the cases have reached nearly 1,800. The terrorist militia has besieged the cities of Al-Fashir, Kadugli, and Diling, and blocked humanitarian access and access to foodstuffs in the camps of Zamzam and Abu Shok. The actions by the terrorist militia included enforced displacement, rape, and the despoliation in the provinces of Al Jazeera, Sennar, North and West Kordofan, Al Khartoum, and Western Darfur, with the number of violations reaching over 30,000 murders and over 43,000 injured. The violations are increasing given the support by the UAE to the terrorist militia with arms and equipment. And the damage that we have incurred so far has reached $771 billion. And we'd like to recommend the following: to end the mandate of the FFM because we have national judicial apparatuses that are willing to apply the law and accountability. Second, to put pressure on the UAE and other countries that support the terrorist militia. And thirdly, to call upon the international community to stop recruiting the mercenaries in Sudan. Thank you.
Merci. J'invite les délégués.
Thank you. I'd now like to call on interested delegations to ask questions and make comments on the report. Speaking time is restricted to 1 minute and 30 seconds for each delegation. The list of speakers has now been closed. I'd like to give the floor to the distinguished representative of the United Kingdom on behalf of a group of countries.
Thank you, Mr. President. I deliver this statement on behalf of the Item 2 core group for Sudan, Germany, Ireland, the Netherlands, Norway, and the UK. The details contained in the fact-finding mission's report are frankly horrific. Sudan's brutal conflict has triggered the world's largest humanitarian crisis, with 8.7 million people on the brink of famine and over 12.5 million displaced. Despite commitments made in 2023 through the Jeddah Declaration, the warring parties and allied militias continue to prioritise military gain over civilian lives. The fact-finding mission's report confirms that civilians have been executed based on their ethnicity, that women and children are subjected to sexual violence on an unimaginable scale, that hospitals have been destroyed, and that aid workers, journalists, and media workers have been killed. These crimes demand accountability. Our shared responsibility as members of this Council is to promote and protect human rights and to prevent and scrutinise violations and abuses. That is why the fact-finding mandate must be extended. We urge all HRC members to provide their full support. Mr. President, this war must end. We call on the international community, including regional actors, the African Union and the UN, to use its influence to push for peace talks, unblock humanitarian access, ensure civilian safety, respect the arms embargo, and promote peace and accountability. Thank you.
Merci. Je donne la...
Thank you. I'd now like to call on the distinguished representative of the European Union.
Mr. President, members of the FFM, the EU thanks you for your very important report. Despite all the difficulties you have encountered in Sudan, your work remains paramount for accountability. We remain appalled by the grave human rights violations and atrocities committed by SAF, RSF, and allied armed groups. Famine has been ongoing for far too long. Attacks on humanitarian workers and operations undermine the lifelines that sustain millions of Sudanese people. The parties to the conflict have led the country to the brink of collapse. Millions of lives have been destroyed. Civil society actors, journalists, and media workers continue to be under attack. The EU urges all states to carefully consider your findings and recommendations, both on the pressing need for the protection of the civilian population and measures to address impunity. Perpetrators must be held accountable. We strongly call on all states to respect the UN arms embargo. We encourage the resumption of negotiations for a ceasefire and support a humanitarian pause in El Fasher. We urge the parties and all actors to act constructively in facilitating humanitarian access and protection. The EU stands determined to strengthen the humanitarian response. I thank you.
Merci, je donne la parole.
Thank you. I call on the distinguished representative of Ghana on behalf of the group of African states.
Mr. President, the African Group reiterates its unwavering solidarity with the people of Sudan at this difficult time. We recall the importance of the principles of complementarity, subsidiarity, and African solutions for African problems. The African Group welcomes the regional mediation efforts and initiatives to solve the crisis in the Sudan. We also welcome all supporting efforts to the negotiation by regional and international actors. We reaffirm the need for a single coordinated international effort to resolve the crisis in Sudan under the auspices of the African Union together with IGAD, with the support of the UN, the League of Arab Nations, key international partners, and based on the AU roadmap for the resolution of the Sudan crisis. At this stage, we are of the view that the immediate and utmost priority is to silence the guns and achieve ceasefire. We call for immediate implementation of the UN Security Council Resolution 2736, guaranteeing the delivery of life-saving humanitarian aid. We urge all Sudanese parties to continue the dialogue towards amicable consensual solution to the political impasse in Sudan and lead the country to a smooth and peaceful transition to democracy. We urge the international community to provide all necessary support to the Sudan. Mr. President, the people of the Sudan cannot wait. Thank you.
Merci, je donne.
Thank you. I call on distinguished representative of Algeria on behalf of the group of Arab states.
السيد الرئيس يشرف
President, it is my honor to deliver this statement on behalf of the Arab group. This statement expresses our full solidarity with Sudan and its people as it tries to preserve its territories and its critical infrastructure. We reject interference in Sudan's affairs, and we call for supporting its efforts to preserve its national institutions and make sure that they are not undermined or weakened, and we reject the presence of any entities that threaten the territorial integrity of Sudan or leads to a humanitarian crisis. We would like to see a ceasefire based on the Jeddah Declaration and to ensure that Jeddah 3 can be applied to reach sustainable, peaceful solutions. And we value the humanitarian and development efforts that are being delivered to confront the difficult situation in Sudan. And the Arab group in this context would like to reaffirm the importance of the immediate implementation of Security Council Resolution 2736 and other UN resolutions. President.
Thank you. I call on the distinguished representative of Norway on behalf of a group of countries.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Nordic and Baltic countries thank the FFM for its report, its briefing right now, and welcome its recommendations. President, colleagues, the FFM has a unique role to play with respect to future accountability, which is essential to breaking the cycle of violence, a cycle that has ridden Sudan for far too long. The FFM latest report indicates large-scale atrocities, including war crimes, some acts that may amount to crimes against humanity. The people of Sudan face a catastrophic humanitarian and human rights crisis. Our thoughts are with them, also in light of the landslide last week. Millions have been displaced. Famine has taken hold. The situation in and around Al-Fasher, North Darfur, is alarming. There are continued and credible reports of serious violations committed by all parties, including targeted attacks of civilians, ethnically motivated killings and violence, arbitrary arrests and detentions. Sexual and gender-based violence in Sudan remain deeply concerning, with women and children suffering disproportionately. We therefore strongly urge the parties to agree to a sustained ceasefire and uphold their obligations on international human rights and international humanitarian law. Safe and unhindered access must be ensured. Civilians must be protected. Encourage all parties to grant access to and work with the FFM and regional countries to facilitate its work. I thank you.
Thank you. I call on the distinguished representative of the United Arab Emirates.
President, the UAE would like to express its deep concern with regard to the deteriorating conflict in Sudan and the humanitarian repercussions and the lack of food security, as attested by various UN reports. Particularly, there's the targeting of civilians by the warring parties. And there are alarming reports on gender-based violence and the blockade on humanitarian crisis and using aid or using humanitarian assistance as a tool of a war. The UAE has called for a sustainable ceasefire and a transition to an independent government, and we reject all of the vague claims that have been pronounced by the representative. There is a question about a certain bias by the mission as stipulated by the delegation. There are cases of extrajudicial killings and an undermining of humanitarian efforts by the SAF. Thank you, President.
Merci.
Thank you. I call on the distinguished representative of Egypt.
السيد الرئيس.
Thank you, President. We'd like to express our solidarity with the people of Sudan and the importance of restoring the stability and security and national integrity. And we insist on the importance of the humanitarian response and access to humanitarian assistance. And any solution in Sudan will have to be a Sudanese solution that brings together all national parties within the framework of respecting the sovereignty of Sudan without any foreign interference or undermining of the legitimacy of its institutions. We support the efforts towards reconstruction, and the international partners should fulfill their obligations as part of the UN response in order to create the right conditions for the preservation of the human rights and prospects for development. New mandates under the Council should always benefit from the consent of the concerned country, which preserves the principle of mutual respect and response to national priorities. We call upon the Council to revisit its decision to create such mechanisms that do not benefit from the consent, particularly as the UN is going through a financial crisis. And we reaffirm the importance of the role of the Council in providing support based on the needs and priorities of every concerned country. Thank you.
Thank you. I call on the distinguished representative of Canada.
Thank you, Mr. President. Canada thanks the fact-finding mission for its report. We are deeply alarmed by its conclusions that the RSF and the SAF committed war crimes, and that the RSF's conduct may also amount to crimes against humanity. Civilians are enduring immense suffering and grave, unspeakable human rights violations. Violations of international humanitarian law are rampant. Conflict-related sexual violence is widespread, inflicting profound harm on women and girls, mothers, daughters, sisters. This must end immediately. Famine, confirmed in several areas, is expected to spread. The siege of Al Fasher is life-threatening for civilians who face deliberate and indiscriminate attacks, worsening famine due to soaring food prices and a cholera outbreak. Canada urges all parties to uphold their obligations under international human rights and humanitarian law, including allowing and facilitating rapid and unimpeded passage of humanitarian supplies and personnel, to adhere to a permanent ceasefire, and to restore a civilian-led, representative, and inclusive government. Coordinated international action to disrupt the illicit gold trade fueling this conflict, alongside responsible resource governance, are essential for lasting peace. Canada stands firmly with the people of Sudan in their pursuit of peace. Mr. Chair of the FFM, what steps are needed to secure humanitarian access in Sudan? Thank you.
Merci. Je donne la parole.
Thank you. I call on distinguished representative of Eritrea.
Thank you, Mr. President. As a close and sisterly nation to the Sudan, Eritrea firmly opposes the irresponsible nature of this mandate. There is a profound lack of understanding within this council regarding the history, context, and realities of the country concerned, especially among the penholders who insist on promoting agendas they claim to be in the best interest of the Sudan. The government of Sudan has fully cooperated with the designated expert on human rights in Sudan, the UN panel of experts, and the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights. This raises the question, what is the purpose of the fact-finding mission? Why are we not focusing our collective efforts on supporting the government of Sudan in its pursuit for peace and security, goals that benefit not only the government, but more importantly, the people of Sudan? Why is there an insistence on multiple mechanisms? In a time when Sudan faces significant challenges, this is not the type of support the international community should be providing Sudan. Sudan needs our contributions toward a sustainable resolution, not actions that further exacerbate the situation or distract us from urgent priorities. As a part of our diplomatic efforts aimed at achieving a permanent ceasefire and elevating humanitarian suffering, Eritrea will continue to work closely with the government of Sudan until a lasting and peaceful solution is realized. I thank you.
Merci, je donne la parole.
Thank you. I call on distinguished representative of the United Kingdom.
Mr. President, it is hard to find the words to express the horrors contained in this fact-finding mission's report. The people of Sudan continue to face unimaginable suffering. The report clearly documents civilians targeted by ethnicity, women and girls raped, and indiscriminate attacks on civilians committed by all parties to the conflict. Over 30 billion people are in need, yet humanitarian assistance is deliberately blocked. The Rapid Support Forces' recent attack on El Fasher and Abu Shok displacement camps have caused devastation, and the Sudanese Armed Forces' reprisal killings are unimaginably brutal. We urge all council members to condemn such violations and abuses and use all tools to hold the warring parties accountable. Mr. President, while we note Sudan's comments about its national accountability efforts, regrettably, as the report clearly states, these are not sufficient to hold perpetrators to account. The fact-finding mission remains the only independent investigative body documenting and reporting on these violations. Its mandate must be extended this session. This is the only way to secure justice for victims and support long-term peace in Sudan. Independent, verified evidence is in the interest of all parties. Let us show the people of Sudan they are not forgotten. Thank you.
Merci, je donne la parole.
Thank you. I call on distinguished representative of Algeria.
Monsieur le Président, يعني بوفد بلادي عن
We'd like to express our full solidarity with the brotherly people of Sudan, and we insist on the importance of respecting the sovereignty of Sudan and its territorial integrity as pillars that should never be undermined in any circumstance. In this regard, my delegation reaffirms that any unilateral efforts will only deepen the division and fuel the conflict at a time where Sudan needs a coalition of efforts to ensure an immediate ceasefire and the initiation of a comprehensive Sudan-owned political process that preserves the dignity and prospects of development for the Sudanese people. We value the ongoing efforts to bring humanitarian aid to the afflicted, and we call for removing all obstacles that prevent humanitarian access from reaching those in need. This is why we'd like Security Council Resolution 2736 to be implemented immediately, and we refuse any form of foreign interference, particularly through military support to the warring parties, because that has a direct impact on deepening the conflict and the suffering of the Sudanese people. And the regional and international processes are supported by Algeria in favor of peace and the national cohesion at the service of the higher interests of Sudan. Thank you.
Merci, je donne la parole.
Thank you. I call on distinguished representative of Jordan.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. السيد الرئيس استمعنا لإحاطة بعثة.
Thank you, Chair. We have heard the report from the fact-finding mission, which has been submitted to the Council. In this regard, we have a clear position. There must be respect for Sudanese territory and sovereignty, and we oppose any attempt to undermine that. We call for an immediate ceasefire so that we can achieve a political solution to curb this violence and stop the bloodshed so that we can guarantee a safe and prosperous future for the Sudanese people. In conclusion, we do hope that our brothers and sisters in Sudan will overcome the current challenges so that the dreams of Sudanese children can be achieved. Thank you.
Merci, je donne la parole.
Thank you. I call on distinguished representative of Belgium.
Mr. President, Belgium aligns itself with the EU statement. Widespread violations and abuses of human rights and international humanitarian law, which may account to war crimes, continue with impunity in Sudan. We are appalled by the brutality of the violence and the total disregard towards civilians, systematic sexual and gender-based violence, summary executions, enforced disappearances, arbitrary detentions, torture, reports of ethnic cleansing, the increasing number of grave violations against children, as well as the continued shrinking of civic space. A credible and victim-oriented accountability process is long overdue. As the report indicated, thorough legal institutional reform is urgently needed to strengthen the independence of the judiciary and ensure due process and fair trial safeguards. In that regard, we are deeply concerned about the death sentences that have been handed down and call for the review of such sentences and an immediate moratorium on its implementation. The work of the FFM is essential, and we urge the Sudanese authorities to grant it full and unhindered access. Humanitarian aid must also be allowed to reach all areas, especially Al-Fashir, and attacks on aid workers must stop. Members of the FFM, what measures are being taken to strengthen the reporting and the follow-up of cases of sexual and gender-based violence, particularly through a victim-centered approach? I thank you.
Merci, je donne la parole.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Qatar.
السيد الرئيس تتابع بلادي بقلق.
Mr. President, my country is following the human rights situation in Sudan with concern. We also see the economic and social impact on the Palestinian people due to the war. We condemn the serious violations against this people, the targeting of basic infrastructure. We call on accountability for these acts and for perpetrators to be held to account. We call on a global and serious dialogue to be resumed in order to avoid a massacre, restore peace, and avoid divisions in the country. We must also ensure that humanitarian deliveries can be brought to the people. We have a firm position that is to support the unity, integrity of Sudan. We support the brotherly people of Sudan in order for it to enjoy the right to development and prosperity. We will continue to provide humanitarian aid. We have $75 million earmarked to support Sudan. We have also allocated $10 million to support women and children impacted by the war. We call for more efforts from the international community to put an end to the war and to ensure that the Jeddah Declaration is implemented. We call on the international community to intensify its humanitarian assistance to Sudan and reject any interference. Thank you.
Merci, je donne la parole.
Thank you. And I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Ireland.
Thank you, President. Ireland aligns with the statement of the EU and commends the important work of the FFM on Sudan. Thank you for your comprehensive report despite the impediments you faced in terms of access. Ireland remains deeply concerned by the serious human rights violations and abuses that have occurred since the outbreak of the conflict and the level of displacement and extreme humanitarian need. Ireland has consistently emphasised the need to protect civilians and continues to call for an end to the environment of impunity in Sudan. In particular, we strongly condemn the extensive and indiscriminate targeting of civilians, including through sexual and gender-based violence, ethnically targeted killings, attacks on critical civilian infrastructure, and forcible displacement. It is imperative that the perpetrators of war crimes and crimes against humanity are held accountable and brought to justice. In this regard, the work of the FFM remains critical. Ireland continues to call for a ceasefire, humanitarian access, the protection of civilians, and accountability for human rights violations and abuses. Members of the FFM, what concrete steps can the international community take to support efforts to ensure justice and accountability in Sudan? Thank you.
Merci. Je donne la parole.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Ethiopia.
Thank you, Mr. President. Ethiopia firmly believes that the brotherly people of Sudan deserve lasting peace, stability, and dignity. The ongoing violence and humanitarian suffering must come to an immediate end. At this critical juncture, Ethiopia underscores the urgent need to silence the guns, secure a ceasefire, and address the dire humanitarian situation on the ground. It is evident that the crisis in Sudan can only be resolved through peaceful dialogue. To this end, Ethiopia firmly believes that a durable political solution must be Sudanese-owned and inclusive of all stakeholders. We commend the efforts of the regional and international initiatives that support the Sudanese parties in their quest for peace, including the mediation efforts aimed at ceasing hostilities and resuming political negotiations. To this end, Ethiopia reaffirms its commitment to actively engage with the conflicting parties and support efforts aimed at restoring peace and stability in Sudan. We call on the international community to continue providing support to Sudan upon request to help the country overcome the challenges of its transitional period. We also reiterate our unwavering commitment to upholding the Sudanese sovereignty, territorial integrity, and independence and political unity. In conclusion, as a close neighbor and sisterly nation, Ethiopia stands in solidarity.
Je donne la parole au distingué.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Saudi Arabia.
Saudi Arabia.
السيد الرئيس تجدد المملكة تأكيدها على موقع.
Mr. President, our kingdom reiterates its position. We support the Republic of Sudan. We emphasize the importance of protecting civilians and humanitarian workers. It is crucial to prioritize the interests of the people of Sudan. We recall that we have hosted the Jeddah discussions amongst the parties to the conflict, which led to the Jeddah Declaration of the 11th of May 2023, which clearly stipulates that civilians must be protected. We reject any procedure that falls outside the scope of the official framework of the authorities. We continue our diplomatic engagements with partners regionally and internationally, and we call on parties to take on their responsibilities in order to overcome this critical crisis. We extend our condolences to Sudan and to its people following the landslide which occurred in Jabal al-Mara. We express our solidarity with Sudan, and we hope for this people that it will finally experience security, safety, and prosperity. Thank you.
Merci. Je donne la parole.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Sri Lanka.
Mr. President, Sri Lanka reaffirms its principled position that country-specific resolutions and initiatives which do not enjoy the support of the country concerned are counterproductive, ineffective, or a drain on resources and will not achieve peace or stability. Any action of the Council to improve the human rights situation of a country cannot be imposed, but should be at the request of and with the agreement of the country concerned, in keeping with the principles of dialogue and cooperation that are integral to multilateralism. The Council must strictly adhere to the principle of sovereignty, unity, and territorial integrity of states, and abide by the guiding principles of universality, impartiality, objectivity, and non-selectivity that are stipulated in the GA Resolution 60/251 and the IB package, which set up the HRC. Mr. President, Sri Lanka calls upon all concerned parties to engage in and support the national efforts of the Sudan through the constructive dialogue based on goodwill and cooperation, guided by international law, norms, and standards. Thank you.
Merci. Je donne la parole.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Libya.
السيد الرئيس يضم وفد بلادي صوته.
Mr. President, My delegation aligns itself with the statements made by the groups to which we belong. We express our solidarity with the Sudanese people, our brotherly people, and we emphasize the need to uphold the sovereignty of Sudan. Our priority is currently a ceasefire and to ensure that humanitarian assistance is provided in order to alleviate the plight of civilians. We we call on parties in Sudan to continue a dialogue to achieve a sustained peace. Mr. President, my country reiterates the importance to uphold the national empowerment and ownership of this process in order to bring an end to violence and to come out of the current crisis. To conclude, Mr. President, we reiterate the importance of the councils taking the consent of the authorities before establishing a new mechanism or extending the current mechanism. We call on parties to provide assistance to Sudan to ensure that it can continue to promote human rights. Thank you.
Merci. Je donne la parole au distingué.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Switzerland.
Monsieur le Président.
Mr. President, we thank the fact-finding mission for its report. Sudan is not receiving the attention required by this crisis. The hostilities intensified in North Darfur and Kordofan are characterized by severe violations of international humanitarian rights and human rights by all parties to the conflict. We are concerned by the brutal attacks carried out by the RSF in the Al Fasher region. The strong increase of sexual violence frequently perpetrated in the displaced persons camp controlled by the RSF is of particular concern. In parallel, the parties to the conflict are instrumentalizing humanitarian assistance and aggravating a humanitarian situation which is already disastrous. We call on all parties to the conflict to guarantee unimpeded humanitarian access and recall that the use of famine as a method of war is strictly prohibited and constitutes a crime of war. We firmly condemn violence committed by all parties to the conflict against civilians, including humanitarian personnel, and reiterate our call to immediately cease hostility and fully cooperate with the UN and the ICC. We call on all states to fully apply the embargo on weapons decided upon by the Security Council to guarantee accountability for violations of international humanitarian law and human rights is a priority for Switzerland. Therefore, how can we better support civil society actors in their work for accountability? Thank you. I give the floor to Romania.
Mr. President, Romania aligns itself with the statement delivered by the European Union. We thank the fact-finding mission for its valuable work and the comprehensive report. We reaffirm our strong support for the renewal of the mandate. It is our conviction, too, that peace without justice is an illusion. That's why ensuring adequate resources for the fulfillment of the investigative functions, but also granting the FFM unhindered access by the Sudanese authorities and full cooperation remain crucial. Violations of human rights and of international humanitarian law continue in the country ravaged by the conflict and are deeply worrying. Indiscriminate and deliberate attacks against civilians, including women and children, attacks against civilian infrastructure, medical facilities and humanitarian supplies, hunger and forced displacements, widespread sexual and gender-based violence. What is also painful to face and comprehend is the lack so far of any tangible prospects of a permanent ceasefire and of an end of reported serious human rights violations. It is hard not to question then, esteemed FFM members, is there anything within the reach but not yet done by the international community to prevent further escalation, to put an end to this conflict and ensure reconciliation and accountability? Thank you.
Merci. Je donne la parole.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Zambia.
Thank you, Mr. President. Zambia aligns itself with a statement delivered by the African Union, the African Group. Zambia expresses grave concern at the continued hostilities in Sudan and its devastating humanitarian toll. We are deeply concerned by reports of gender-based violence and the disproportionate suffering inflicted upon women, children, and vulnerable groups. The protection of civilians and civilian infrastructure must remain a priority, and humanitarian assistance must reach all those in need without obstruction. Thus, we call for an immediate cessation of hostilities, safe humanitarian corridors, and full respect for international humanitarian law. Accountability for grave abuses must be ensured. Sustainable peace requires inclusive dialogue. led by Sudanese stakeholders and supported by the African Union and the Intergovernmental Authority on Development, IGAD. We urge the international community to scale up humanitarian support, particularly for women and children who remain disproportionately affected in crisis. I thank you, Mr. President.
Merci.
Thank you. I give the floor to UN Women.
Thank you, Mr. President. UN Women welcomes the fact-finding mission's findings and recommendations. The harms inflicted on women and girls in Sudan have not eased. They have deepened and become entrenched. Across the conflict areas, the pattern is clear. Women and girls are targeted for the gravest human rights violations due to their gender. They're subjected to rape, abduction, trafficking, and forced into marriage, assaulted in shelters, and arbitrarily detained. Attacks on healthcare deny survivors post-rape treatment and force pregnant women to deliver without skilled care. Women humanitarians and human rights defenders face threats, detentions, and smear campaigns, while blackouts and bureaucracy block their work and silence treatment. Accountability and justice must be real and reachable for women and girls in Sudan. Evidence must be preserved, survivors protected, and crimes, including conflict-related sexual violence, investigated and prosecuted. Women and girls' access to justice and to comprehensive life-saving services must be ensured. Dear Excellencies, we're at a tipping point where failure to act will deepen the crisis. UN Women is ready to support the international community's efforts to strengthen gender-responsive assistance, fund women-led organizations, elevate women's leadership, and ensure their full and meaningful participation in ceasefire and political processes. I thank you.
Merci. Je donne la parole.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Luxembourg.
We don't have mic.
Microphone, please.
Microphone for Luxembourg.
Monsieur le Président, le Luxembourg s'associe à la
Non.
déclaration de l'Union européenne et présente ses condoléances aux victimes du glissement de terrain au Darfour.
Sorry, can you maybe, I don't know why it doesn't work. Try again.
No.
Maybe the next desk on the side.
Oh, yeah. Does this work?
Okay. Apologies. Monsieur le Président.
Mr. President, Luxembourg aligns itself with the statement of the European Union and presents its condolences to the victims of the landslide in Darfur. Following 2.5 years of civil war, Sudan as a population requires humanitarian assistance. It is 2/3 of its population that requires such aid. It's the greatest humanitarian crisis in the world. Sexual violence and human rights violations, as well as violations of international humanitarian rights, prevail and have become a norm. It is imperative to put an end to this climate of impunity and insecurity. Given this dark portrait, it is essential to the fact-finding mission to carry out its work to allow the Sudanese to speak, and we thank it for its work. A famine has been declared, but humanitarian assistance still doesn't arrive, and the security of humanitarian workers is not guaranteed. We would like to take this opportunity to pay tribute to the over 80 humanitarian workers killed since the beginning of the conflict. We reiterate our call to uphold the arms embargo as it nourishes the conflict, and this would allow us to achieve a cessation of hostility and an inclusive solution to the conflict. Mr. President, how can we ensure that the voices of the Sudanese are heard to a greater extent, including outside of this council? Thank you. Thank you. I apologize for the technical difficulty, and I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Kuwait.
Thank you, Mr. President. We have reviewed the report of the fact-finding mission and its documentation of grave violations against civilians. We express our concern and reaffirm the gravity of continuing this unacceptable humanitarian situation. For us, the priority is a comprehensive and immediate ceasefire and to provide the humanitarian relief without any obstacles. We reaffirm the importance of resuming negotiations between the Sudanese parties to avoid more risks and pave the way to a comprehensive peace. Kuwait reaffirms its position that supports the unity, stability, and territorial integrity of the Sudan. We refuse any form of foreign interference. A political solution that is comprehensive is the only way towards peace, security, and development. We reaffirm that we must continue providing all forms of support and humanitarian assistance. We call on the international community to intensify its efforts to respond to the needs of the people of Sudan. Thank you.
Merci, je donne la parole.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished delegate of Chad.
Merci.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, Chad aligns itself with a statement made by the African Group and welcomes the work carried out by the fact-finding mission. Chad would also like to convey its condolences to the victims of the landslide which occurred in Darfur. Mr. President, Chad is experiencing the full brunt of the consequences of the armed conflict devastating our brotherly country, Sudan, at a socioeconomic, financial, security, and environmental price that is exorbitant. We host almost 2 million Sudanese refugees in our country, and this exceptional hospitality is currently rudely tested. We call for a strengthening of international cooperation and solidarity in order to ensure a fair burden sharing and the sharing of responsibility that is also predictable. Chad reiterates its neutrality and its existential interest in a prompt return of peace to Sudan. The participation of Chad in all international initiatives on Sudan testifies to its reiterated will to support the authorities of the country and work towards a process of peace and stability in this brotherly country. We are also seriously concerned by allegations relating to the use of chemical weapons in Sudan. Thank you. I give the floor to the representative of Tunisia.
Thank you, Mr. President. After listening to the report of the mission, we express our concern at the deteriorating situation in the Sudan. We express our solidarity with the Sudan in this critical moment. We welcome national, regional, and international efforts that aim at de-escalating the conflict and achieving peace. We reaffirm the importance of a Sudanese ownership of a solution and a political process, and reiterate the importance of respecting the sovereignty and territorial integrity of the Sudan. We reaffirm the importance of starting with a ceasefire and providing assistance to the civilians in accordance with the Security Council resolutions. In conclusion, we appreciate all efforts made at all levels to achieve a political solution and a transitional, peaceful period that would lead to free and fair elections. We believe that it is essential to continue collaboration with all UN mechanisms. Thank you.
Merci.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Ghana.
Mr. President, my delegation takes note of the oral update delivered by the Independent International Fact-Finding Mission for Sudan. Ghana reaffirms that the foremost duty to safeguard civilians and uphold human rights rests with the Sudanese authorities. We continue to be profoundly concerned by the devastating loss of civilian lives and reiterate our urgent call for an immediate cessation of hostilities. We respectfully urge both the Sudanese armed forces and the rapid support forces to avoid any further escalations, to commit to an inclusive dialogue for the peaceful resolution of their differences, and to heed the aspirations of the Sudanese people for democracy, rule of law, and the protection of fundamental freedoms. Mr. President, my delegation urges the international community and humanitarian partners to step up critical financial contributions to address the severe funding gaps in the humanitarian response plan. It is also vital that all parties guarantee safe, unimpeded humanitarian access throughout Sudan, as effective relief depends on secure front lines operations and well-coordinated delivery efforts. In conclusion, we recognize and appreciate the efforts of all parties contributing positively to regional and international peace initiatives, and we encourage this council to maintain a unified voice in affirming clearly that.
Je donne la parole au distingué.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of the Democratic People's Republic of Korea.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Human Rights Council should sincerely engage in constructive dialogue and cooperation when addressing the human rights issues in the country concerned, while refraining from any biased and politicized approach, including attempt interference in internal affairs or exerting pressure under the pretext of human rights. Any approach that lacks the consent and cooperation of the country concerned cannot bring about positive developments and only serves to undermine the credibility of the Council. The DPRK underscores the importance of giving priority to existing national and regional mechanisms in resolving crises. The expansion of initiatives by external parties is counterproductive and does not contribute to genuine progress. Reaffirm our principled commitment to respect for the sovereignty, territorial integrity, independence, and political unity of Sudan, as well as the importance of dialogue and cooperation in the promotion and protection of human rights. We therefore urge the UNHRC to encourage genuine dialogue and cooperation with states to carry out its work strictly in an objective and impartial manner, and to firmly stand against politicization, selectivity, and double standards in the field of human rights. I thank you.
Merci. Je donne la parole à la.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of New Zealand.
New Zealand welcomes the FFM's report on the human rights situation in Sudan. More than 2 years on, the war in Sudan continues to have a devastating impact on Sudanese civilians, with no end in sight. Some 10 million people are displaced internally, 4 million refugees have fled to neighboring countries, and 25 million people face acute food insecurity, including famine. New Zealand remains gravely concerned by parties' ongoing disregard of international law and indiscriminate targeting of civilian populations. We deplore the abhorrent reports of ethnically motivated and sexual and gender-based violence, including against children, as well as ongoing accounts of summary executions, forced displacement, and the obstruction of humanitarian aid. New Zealand calls on all parties to uphold their obligations under international law, including respect for international human rights law, and ensure the rapid and unimpeded passage of humanitarian aid desperately required by millions of Sudanese people. We urge all parties to engage in good faith negotiations to reach an immediate cessation of hostilities and a durable, inclusive political solution to the conflict. We welcome all efforts towards dialogue, mediation, and accountability to this end. Ultimately, the goal must be for all parties to work towards the transition to a civilian-led, democratic government and lasting peace. Thank you.
Merci. Je donne la parole.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Iraq.
Thank you, Mr. President. We have reviewed with interest the report of the fact-finding mission on the Sudan. Iraq reaffirms its deep solidarity with the brotherly people of the Sudan in this predicament that has escalated the suffering of civilians, especially women, children, the elderly, and the most vulnerable populations. And this has led to grave damage of the infrastructure. We reiterate our call to stop foreign interference in Sudanese affairs. We call on all Sudanese parties to use the language of dialogue. It is the best way to achieve civil peace. We reaffirm the importance of regional and international efforts to achieve a ceasefire and start a comprehensive political process that guarantees the stability and unity of the Sudan. In conclusion, we reaffirm the importance of achieving a political solution that puts an end to the conflict, preserves the territorial integrity of the Sudan. We must allow a safe access for humanitarian aid. And I thank you.
Merci, je donne la parole.
Thank you. I call on the distinguished representative of France. Thank you, President. France expresses its condolences to the families and friends of the victims of the terrible floods which have caused the devastating landslide on the 31st of August in Darfur. We remain in solidarity with the Sudanese people. Members of the fact-finding mission, France endorses the EU statement. We thank you for your report and we support the renewal of your mandate. It's vital for combating impunity for the serious human rights violations committed since the start of the fighting between the Sudanese armed forces, rapid support forces and their affiliated armed groups. You're also vital for supporting victims. In view of the spiraling famine, the disastrous humanitarian situation, we call for everyone to carefully read the conclusions and recommendations in your report. Parties must urgently meet their obligations under international humanitarian law and ensure full and unfettered and safe humanitarian access to the whole of the country. France pursues its efforts to achieve a peaceful settlement to the conflict and to respond to the humanitarian crisis. We call on all parties to commit to negotiations to achieve a lasting ceasefire. The President, I now call on the distinguished representative of North Macedonia.
Thank you, Mr. President. We commend the fact-finding mission for its resolute and meaningful work under extremely challenging conditions. The security and humanitarian situation in Sudan have further deteriorated. The country is now facing one of the gravest humanitarian and human rights crises of our time. More than 13 million people are displaced, tens of thousands killed. Civilians are being deliberately denied food and water. Sexual and gender-based violence is alarming. Health and other public facilities are under attack while humanitarian aid is being blocked. We welcome international and regional efforts towards a sustainable peace. But words are not enough, and a permanent ceasefire must be reached. Safe, unhindered humanitarian access guaranteed. Civilian protection, especially for women and girls, must be at the core of the response. Mr. President, the fact-finding mission remains a vital instrument for truth and accountability. Its work must continue with full political and financial support from this Council. Justice cannot wait, impunity must not stand, and peace must be restored. I thank you.
Merci, je donne la parole.
Thank you. I call on distinguished representative of South Africa.
Mr. President, South Africa aligns with the African Group statements and stands in solidarity with the people of Sudan. We share the concerns expressed by the FFM regarding the impact of the conflict on the lives of the innocent and encourage it to continue to cooperate with the FFM on the African Commission on Human and People's Rights. Indeed, civilians continue to bear the brunt of this ongoing human tragedy, which is reflected in the horrific litany of violations and abuses of international human rights and humanitarian law, some of which may amount to war crimes. The latest attacks on El Afesha is another example of the atrocities committed against civilians. All perpetrators must be held accountable for their actions. Accordingly, South Africa appeals to all parties to respect international law. We call for the ceasefire and the flow of humanitarian aid. In doing so, we acknowledge the various mediation initiatives undertaken and underscore the need to coordinate efforts on Sudan under the auspices of the AU and IGAD. We believe that there can be no military solution to this conflict and that it can only be resolved through Sudanese-led all-inclusive dialogue, creating the conditions of a political transition towards a democratically elected civilian government. Accordingly, South Africa calls for an end to an external interference fueling the conflict and expresses concern about the attempts to fragment Sudan. The flow of arms must be stopped and the guns must be silenced once and for all. I thank you.
Merci.
Thank you. I call on distinguished representative of Japan.
Merci, Mr. President. Let me begin by saying that Japan extends its deepest condolence to the bereaved family of the victim of the recent landslide. Japan appreciates the work of FFM, which is vital to ensuring impartial accountability. Japan remains deeply concerned about the human rights situation in Sudan. 2 years of conflict and political instability have led to mass displacement and grave humanitarian crisis. Women and girls in particular have been subjected to sexual violence, and tens of thousands of children have been put at risk of death from famine and inadequate health care. All persons' rights to the enjoyment of the highest attainable standard of physical and mental health and adequate food must be protected. Japan reiterates its call on all parties to the conflict to immediately cease hostilities and uphold their obligation under international humanitarian law and international human rights law. We urge all parties to guarantee immediate, unconditional, safe, and unhindered humanitarian access to the population in need while also protecting civilians. Japan remains committed to working with the international community, including through the work of its special envoy for the Horn of Africa, for the cessation of hostility, for improved access to humanitarian aid, and to support Sudanese effort towards an orderly transition to civilian rule. I thank you.
Merci. Je donne la...
Thank you. I call on distinguished representative of Spain. Thank you very much, President. Spain endorses the EU statement, and we would like to reiterate our support to the international fact-finding mission. Despite budgetary constraints and a lack of access, you continue to do vital work to combat impunity. We share many of the comments made by South Africa and other delegations. There are some very serious human rights violations in Sudan, leading to many millions of people needing humanitarian aid, and the crisis is spilling over borders. So that's why the international community and this council must support Sudan. We call on all parties to protect civilians, and we call on the rapid support forces to honour the commitments made in the Jeddah Declaration by recognising international humanitarian law and ensuring that there is safe access for humanitarian aid. The International Criminal Court has found reasonable grounds to believe that crimes against humanity and war crimes are being committed in Sudan. That's something which concerns us all. Thank you very much.
Merci. Je donne la parole au distingué.
Thank you. I call on distinguished representative of Liechtenstein.
President, Liechtenstein thanks the fact-finding mission on Sudan for the presentation of its report and its crucial work for accountability. We are shocked by the continued deterioration of the human rights situation and the widespread violations and abuses of human rights in the context of escalating hostilities in the Sudan. The situation that the internally displaced persons face is particularly disturbing, as millions were forced to flee their homes and are being denied access to any life-saving aid. We're especially appalled that UN humanitarian convoys attempting to alleviate this horrific situation have been targeted by aerial strikes. Humanitarian workers are protected explicitly under international humanitarian law and must never become military targets. We urge the warring parties to facilitate the safe and unimpeded delivery of humanitarian aid and immediately agree to a ceasefire. It must be reiterated that all parties to the conflict have an obligation to protect civilians from harm. All perpetrators of crimes under international law must be held to account. I thank you, Mr. President.
Merci.
Thank you. I call on the distinguished representative of Poland.
Thank you, Mr. President. Poland aligns itself with the EU statement. We thank the Independent International Fact-Finding Mission for its comprehensive report. The conflict in Sudan has created an alarming humanitarian emergency. millions of internally displaced persons are deprived of basic shelter, food, clean water, and access to medical care. We are particularly concerned about the grave risk faced by women and children, including violence, exploitation, and abuse. This year, Poland has provided contributions to the UNHCR to support its work with displaced population in Sudan. We call on all parties to comply with their obligations under international humanitarian and human rights law and to ensure unimpeded humanitarian access. We also recall that the safeguarding of cultural rights constitutes an integral component of human dignity. Poland's long-standing archaeological cooperation in Dogola, in northern Sudan, demonstrates how international engagement can contribute to preserving and reinforcing resilience even amid conflict. Thank you.
Merci. Je donne la parole au
Thank you. I call on the distinguished representative of Turkey.
Mr. President, we find ourselves in agreement with the overwhelming majority of the international community. The situation in Sudan continues to be a source of grave concern. Humanitarian crisis is indeed deepening. Most of the public health institutions are out of service in conflict-affected areas, and this is near total collapse of health and sanitary infrastructure. The establishment of a reliable ceasefire, sustainable and safe humanitarian corridors in Sudan remains to be an urgent need to ensure uninterrupted delivery of humanitarian aid. Sustainable solutions should be developed through harnessing Sudan's enormous agricultural potential to ensure food security. Sudan's unity, territorial integrity, sovereignty, and independence should be non-negotiable. We support all regional and international initiatives aimed at ending the conflict, easing the human suffering, and preserving Sudan's unity, stability, and security. Mr. President, civilians must be protected in accordance with international human rights and international humanitarian law. Arbitrary killings, recruitment of children, sex-based violence must stop. In order to contribute to the normalization of the country, Turkish Cooperation and Coordination Agency has reopened its office in Port Sudan. Turkish hospital in Niala continues to provide health services to the Sudanese people. Turkey will continue to provide humanitarian aid.
Thank you. I call on distinguished representative of South Sudan.
Thank you, Mr. President. South Sudan has taken note of the report of the fact-finding mission on Sudan and aligns with the African statement. We reaffirm our solidarity and stance with by the people of Sudan and during these challenging times, and reiterate our support for the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Sudan. As neighbor to Sudan, South Sudan has always been keen to ensure settlement of the Sudanese conflict through an amicable political consensual solution by the parties to the conflict, and encourages the international community to continue to support Sudan's efforts of ending the ongoing conflict to achieve peace in the country. Mr. President, we are concerned by the ongoing starvation, loss of life, and mass displacement of millions of people that continues to exacerbate the humanitarian crisis in the sisterly Sudan. In this regard, South Sudan calls upon the international community and the humanitarian partners to step up humanitarian support to help address the situation to save lives, as the government of Sudan has been eager to facilitate the delivery of humanitarian aid to those in need. We commend the commitment of the government of Sudan for comprehensive political, social, societal dialogue, and that reflects actually the diversity of the Sudanese people to pave way for a transition to a civilian-led government. And we commend the cooperation with the Council and its mechanisms. We thank you, Mr. President.
Merci.
Thank you. This was the last speaker we could accommodate. We will now turn to the list of speakers from national human rights institutions and non-governmental organisations. And I call on the speaker from Jubilee Campaign via video.
To the fact-finding mission, we thank you for your update. We thank you for your attention to the attacks on places of worship perpetrated both by the Sudanese armed forces and the rapid support forces, and welcome the news that the mission is planning additional investigations on this topic. Christian converts from Islam face particular pressure and threats, including discrimination in the distribution of aid. We urge the UN member states to continue to prioritize the return of civilian rule in Sudan, urging SAF and the RSF to return power to the legitimate civilian government of Sudan, which was formed in 2019, hold the perpetrators of violations of freedom of conscience, religion, or belief violations accountable, extend the mandate of the International Criminal Court to include crimes committed throughout the country, and ensure the non-discriminatory distribution of aid. Thank you.
Merci. Je donne la parole à...
Thank you. I call on Eastern Horn of Africa human rights defenders.
Mr. President, dear members of the fact-finding mission, it is difficult to describe Sudan's tragedy with words. Over 2 years after the current conflict started, both warring parties and their allied forces continue to show utter disregard for international law. Your report details a litany of atrocities, including sexual and ethnic-based attacks, some of which constitute serious international crimes under international laws. Those responsible have fulfilled any role in shaping the future of Sudan. All effort must be directed at stopping the war and protecting civilians and centering accountability. These objectives are not mutually incompatible. They are reinforcing each other. Mr. President, over 100 civil society organizations have urged the state to support a mandate extension for the fact-finding mission to allow it to continue collecting and preserving evidence and identifying those responsible. Beyond our call for a 2-year extension, we highlight avenues to enhance global attention to Sudan and enhance accountability. Through both enhanced interactive dialogue and mobilization
Merci.
of
Je
the
donne la
General
parole à
Assembly.
Legal Action.
Thank you. I call on Legal Action Worldwide.
Mr. President, Excellencies, Legal Action Worldwide welcomes the findings made by the FFM, including its novel and sobering finding of the RSF's possible extermination as a crime against humanity. Sudan is now well on its way to mark a 3rd consecutive year of devastating armed conflict. The survivors we represent consistently remind us, quote, "We are invisible to the world, yet we are the ones carrying the wounds." Since April 2023, tens of thousands of civilians have been killed, countless others endure rape and other forms of sexual violence, forced displacement, starvation as a method of warfare, the deliberate destruction of homes, hospitals, markets, and other vital civilian infrastructure. Tens of thousands of Sudanese also remain missing, while humanitarian workers and human rights defenders are regularly being murdered for trying to save lives and uphold basic human rights. Delaying justice is, of course, not neutral. It is a choice that signals such crimes can be committed without consequence. We therefore urge this Council to reinforce and adequately resource the FFM on Sudan, to strive to secure humanitarian access and protection from CRSV, and to embed survivor participation at the core of any justice and peace processes. Mr. President, we have seen impunity fuel Sudan's perennial cycles of violence and conflict for decades now. The questions before this Council are therefore very stark. What more can the Council do to ensure that the crimes of today do not become tomorrow's forgotten atrocities? And how will this Council stand with survivors in their calls for justice rather than risk signaling that mass atrocities carry no cost? We thank you.
Merci.
Thank you. I would like to take this opportunity to remind delegations that if you speak too fast, it makes it impossible for the interpreters to do their work. New room, same rules. I'd now like to give the floor to Vivat International.
Mr. President, the war that broke out on April 15, 2023, between the Rapid Support Forces and the Sudanese Armed Forces has caused the largest ongoing humanitarian crisis, with millions displaced and millions more facing food insecurity and hunger. Since the beginning of this year, the conflict has left Jazeera State and the capital Khartoum the siege of El Fasher in Darfur raises concern of civilians facing the independent fact-finding mission and its recommendation, and hereby urge the ceasefire immediately and resume peace talks abide by international law obligations, Human Rights Council and Security Council resolutions, as well as the Jeddah Declaration. Ensure that all warring parties allow humanitarian aid to be delivered to the most vulnerable and work for the end of any foreign interference in the conflict, particularly the fueling of the conflict with weapons and logistics. Thank you.
Merci.
Thank you. I call on the distinguished representative of the International Service for Human Rights.
Mr. President, the recent surge of violence in North, West, and South Kordofan has intensified a humanitarian catastrophe. But for women and girls, the crisis cuts even deeper. The hunger crisis in South Kordofan, Nuba Mountains, has now reached an acute level. This leaves the population of South Kordofan, especially women, without options, surrounded by death and hunger, as all routes to safer places are blocked. The stories of women and girls are not statistics. They are survivors of massacres. As this crisis deepens, the resilience of Kadugulis women and girls stands as a testament to courage. We call on Council to renew the fact-finding mission. The Council has a moral and political responsibility to respond to the crisis in Sudan. The people of Sudan must not be victims of UN's funding crisis. We call on states to urge the warring parties to ensure an immediate ceasefire and protect civilians. We call on humanitarian agencies to support local women's networks and prioritize corridors for women-led household and ensures emergency access the maternal and reproductive health care. We call on donors to scale up funding for gender-focused responses across Sudan, especially for community kitchens, health care, and protection. Thank you.
Merci. Je donne la parole à Nick.
Thank you. I call on Next Century Foundation.
Excellencies, distinguished delegates, I address you today to urge this Council to extend the mandate of the Independent International Fact-Finding Mission for Sudan for a minimum of 2 more years. More than 2 years into the conflict, Sudan is facing one of the world's most urgent and devastating crises. 30 million people actually require life-saving aid, while 30 million have been displaced, making this the largest displacement globally. Tens of thousands have been killed, and across the country, sexual violence is being used systematically as a weapon of war, targeting women and girls with impunity. The warring parties, alongside allied forces, continue to wage war in total disregard for international law. In its report, the FFM has described a brutal, multifaceted, and increasingly complex conflicts, marking revenge killings and escalating atrocities a norm. The FFM remains one of the few independent mechanisms capable of documenting these crimes, preserving evidence, and identifying those responsible. For this mission to succeed, it must be granted time, stability, and the political support of this Council. We call for this Council to enhance international attention to Sudan by enabling inclusive public debates that involve civil society and especially survivors, and by urging the UN General Assembly to submit FFM report to the Security Council. These Council decisions will shape whether impunity deepens or accountability prevails.
Merci.
Thank you.
Je donne la parole.
Thank you. I call on Christian Solidarity Worldwide by video.
Mr. President and members of the fact-finding mission, the impact of this war on civilians leaves little room for interpretation. This is a war waged on the most vulnerable. It has devastated civilian populations. Nearly 12 million people have been displaced. The targeting of humanitarian infrastructure, cultural and religious sites, including places of worship, is of grave concern. In December 2024, a SAF airstrike against a church in Khartoum led to the deaths of 11 people, including 8 children. In June, the RSF bombed 3 churches in Al Fasher. At least 5 people were killed, including Father Luca Jono, the parish priest of the Catholic Church. Al Fasher has been under siege since April 2024. In April 2025, the RSF seized the Abu Suk and Zamzam camps for internally displaced persons. These 2 camps near Al Fasher have formed the largest IDP settlement in Sudan. Instances of conflict-related sexual violence and gender-based violence, which may amount to atrocity crimes, continue to be reported. The targeting of women and children is a harrowing aspect of this conflict, and deliberate attacks on hospitals, medical centres and humanitarian workers further reduces access to vital and at times life-saving support for those who need it. The FFM's ability to collect evidence, monitor, document, and report on violations of human rights and international humanitarian law in Sudan, including the collection and preservation of testimonies, remains essential. Without accountability, lasting peace, justice, and rule of law cannot prevail. We urge members of this council to ensure that the mandate of the FFM is renewed and that it is fully resourced and able to carry out its work without hindrance. Thank you.
Merci.
Thank you. I call on Committee for Justice.
Mr. President, this is a joint statement delivered on behalf of Committee for Justice and Awaf Sudanese Organization. We wish to draw the Council attention to the ongoing atrocities in Sudan, where the civilians are facing arbitrary detention, enforced disappearance, torture, sexual violence, forced labor, and cynical targeted killings. Nearly 13 million people have been displaced, with millions facing female-like conditions as hospitals, schools, and food supplies are attacked or cut off. Human rights defenders and lawyers and journalists continue to face severe reprisals, including torture and feared trials, enforced disappearance, killings in custody, and civilians have been abducted for ransom. Darfur regions remain one of those areas most affected by the grave abuses, where communities such as Masalit, Berti, For, and Dagawa have been deliberately targeted. Civilians are executed, detention, villages are destroyed, frontline humanitarian workers and convoys face constant attacks, lootings, killings, and blockages. Children, women, and civilians are dying in Al-Fashir due to the siege by the RSF since May 2024. More than 58 deaths were documented in just 1 week due to the absence of the grain and essential food supplies. The fact-finding mission on Sudan has been vital in documenting violations, identifying those responsible, and preserving evidence for future accountability. Ending its mandate in this stage would leave victims without protection. We therefore urge the Council to renew the mandate for 2 years to ensure its...
Thank you. I call on Amnesty International.
Mr. President, the escalating conflict in Sudan between the SAF and the RSF continues to be devastating for civilians. Since the start of the conflict, Amnesty International has documented numerous human rights and humanitarian law violations in the country, including indiscriminate and deliberate attacks on civilians and civilian infrastructure. Our most recent report found that the RSF and forces allied to them have carried out widespread sexual violence, and that these acts of sexual violence amount to war crimes and possible crimes against humanity. External actors continue to fuel this conflict. A recent Amnesty investigation identified the presence of advanced Chinese weaponry provided by the UAE in Sudan in breaching of the existing arms embargo. As the FFM stated in its previous report, impunity remains one of the key root causes of the cycles of violence. Given the scale and intensity of violations and violence across the country, documentation, public reporting, and evidence preservation and identification of perpetrators remains crucial. It is in this regard that we urge the Human Rights Council to reaffirm its engagement on Sudan, including by extending the mandate of the FFM for 2 more years. We also ask all parties to the conflict to cooperate with the FFM with a view to ending violations and promoting accountability. We call on all states to increase emergency humanitarian funding to Sudan, put in place protection and support mechanisms for survivors of violence, and all states to corporate actors must also immediately cease military supplies to Sudan. To the FFM, is your current capacity sufficient to deliver on your mandate? What needs to improve? I thank you.
Thank you. I call on Egypt, Peace for Development and Human Rights.
Thank you, Mr. President. I deliver this statement on behalf of Egypt Peace Development and Human Rights. Mr. President, we wish to express to this esteemed council our deep concern regarding the gross systemic violations of human rights committed by the Sudanese army forces and allied militias against civilians, violations that amount to war crimes and crimes against humanity, particularly the use of chemical weapons, prohibited weapons against civilians. Mr. President, the Sudanese armed forces have carried out ethnic massacres and deliberately targeted civilians and vital facilities, including schools, hospitals, and electricity and water stations. Numerous reports have documented horrific violations, including arbitrary arrest, enforced disappearances, rape and sexual violence, and assaults on minors. The UN report confirm that the actual number of these violations is in the thousands, in addition to the siege of areas and obstruction of humanitarian aid delivery, which has led to immense suffering and famine, reaching catastrophic levels according to the UN reports for 2025. More than 30 million people are facing acute food insecurity,
half of whom are women and children. Mr. President, we stress the urgent need to strengthen the work of the Independent Fact-Finding Committee tasked with documenting violations to renew its mandate and to ensure its ability to operate across all regions of.
Merci. C'était la dernière.
Thank you. This was the last speaker we could accommodate. I would now like to give the floor to the distinguished representative of Sudan who expressed their intention to use part of their time now. You have 2 minutes left.
فيما يتعلق بالاتهامات الواردة من بعض الجهات.
Thank you. I would like to reply to some comments made by some countries with respect to the allegations of the use of, by the armed forces, of weapons of unknown origin. This is a clear position, and it is a violation of Resolution 1996-31. Sudan is taking all measures in this area, and we reiterate Sudan's commitment to uphold the Convention on the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons. There is no doubt that Sudan is complying with its obligation under this convention. Certain sources are attempting to promote these allegations. So we have worked with institutions and ministries to verify these allegations. And we would recall that these sources which are pushing these allegations aim to politicize this body. We would emphasize that the national legislation of our country prohibits the use of chemical weapons. Sudan is committed to this. With respect to the judicial authorities and the alleged inefficiency of this system, I would reiterate that our system is serious in pursuing all allegations. We have a judicial system which operates with integrity and is able to take measures to fight any actions. I would like to remind the speaker who referred to the system to look into the history of our country and to see how our constitution was established. Thank you.
Merci. Je donne.
Thank you. I now give the floor to the members of the mission. First, Joya Sierra, you have 7 minutes to answer.
Thank you so much, Mr. President, Your Excellencies. This is war on Sudanese people, and the civilian population is the primary target. For how long should the international community watch, do nothing, or act in positive and genuine solidarity with the people of Sudan, the ultimate victims of this war? Solidarity, not silence, is what is required. Solidarity shouldn't be mere rhetoric. It should translate into humanitarian aid and access. It should translate into bringing support, needed support to survivors. It should translate into ensuring concrete action to end this war. It should translate into supporting civil society and human rights defenders and all those that are displaced. Unarguably, sexual and gender-based violence is being used as a weapon of war. The patterns, the scale, nature, and manifestations are shocking, horrifying, and constitute torture, serious violation of international humanitarian law and human rights, including crime against humanity. The FFM has documented systematic and disturbing pattern of sexual violence, including rape, gang rape, sexual slavery, forced nudity, amongst others. These violations are mostly attributed to RSF, but also SAF has been implicated. The FFM independence, impartiality, investigation that we've done and documentation so far reinforce the mandate and the importance of this mandate given to us by HRC, which has gathered international support, especially from the people of the Sudan and including human rights defenders. Justice and accountability must be inclusive, gender sensitive, child-centered, and in fact, people-centered, especially for survivors. Accountability will help address the root causes of conflict in Sudan and bring an end to the culture of impunity. To the question around, of course, what can the international community do with the civil society? The reality, the civil society continue to do the work. The support to them is very important, especially it will help provide access to survivors of SGBV and other displaced human rights defenders that are living in penury in refugee camps. The crucial role of civil society must be supported as a way forward towards accountability, justice, and protection of civilians, and in particular, engendering a democratic Sudan. Action and not words, or merely voicing solidarity or sovereignty argument can right the wrongs. Nothing can right the wrongs without accountability and without the determination of international community to ensure that accountability. I will conclude by saying that what we have now, the situation, the issue of the sovereignty, we must emphasize carries obligation, including providing effective remedies by independent and impartial tribunals and courts, and that does not exist as claimed, of course, by the government of Sudan. Thank you.
Thank you very much, all delegations, for the interventions. Just to clarify a few things. Since our last report, we saw a marked change in violations and increase in violations. Not only it continued, but they have deepened and became systematic. Systematic tactics that target civilians directly. I would like just to highlight three major developments in this regard. First is the reprisals. Both parties to the conflict have targeted civilians because of their respective, because of their real or perceived affiliation with the positive side, with the opposite side. Second is starvation. Our mission found that the Rapid Response Force in particular and their allies engaged in large-scale looting, pillage, and destruction of objects indispensable for the survival of the civilian population, including food production systems. We also found that both parties failed to take sufficient measures to minimize the impact of their airstrikes and artillery on the civilian population and infrastructure, including markets and other food production systems and water production systems. And third, and this is for the first time, we are actually invoking extermination as a crime against humanity. The combined effect of deprivation of access to food and medicine and attacks and destruction of humanitarian assistance by the Rapid Response Force may also amount to the crime against humanity. If you add killings, the massive killings that we have seen recently, this amounts to the crime of extermination. We had a question about what can be done with regard to increasing humanitarian assistance. The first thing is to stop the bureaucratic obstruction. A lot of bureaucratic obstruction today, but most importantly is lift the sieges, both on Al-Fashir and in the areas in Kordofan, which now we see happening. And third, and perhaps mostly, stop attacks on convoys, humanitarian convoys, and attacks on humanitarian workers, which is extremely serious. Finally, we were asked about what what can be done with regard to justice. And I'll move into Arabic. I'll switch into Arabic. تقريرنا لا يشمل فقط انتهاكات.
This report doesn't only include violations of international humanitarian law and human rights law, which can amount to international crimes, but also establishes a roadmap to reach justice. The International Court must immediately take action in order to block the use of arms by both parties and achieve justice by supporting the International Criminal Court. And an international mechanism should be established, as well as a national mechanism in Sudan, to guarantee accountability. The perpetrators must be held accountable for their acts, including by sanctions which are defined for such perpetrators. Thank you.
Merci. Ceci.
Thank you. And this leads us to the end of this interactive dialogue. And I would like to thank the members of the mission for their participation. We will now hold a brief break before we enter the enhanced interactive dialogue with the fact-finding mission on the situation in the provinces of in North and South Kivu, and with the international team of experts on the Democratic Republic of the Congo. Thank you.
Excellences, distingués collègues,
Excellencies, distinguished colleagues. Thank you. We will now take up the enhanced interactive dialogue with the fact-finding mission on the situation in North and South Kivu provinces and with the team of international experts on the Democratic Republic of the Congo in line with Resolution S37-1 and 5734 of the Council. Allow me to recall that the Council has decided to hold a single enhanced interactive dialogue on the Democratic Republic of the Congo. During its meeting on the 8th of December, the Bureau had decided to propose to the Council that the speaking time for the delegation of the country concerned by the two resolutions, that is to say the Democratic Republic of the Congo, be of 12 minutes total, that is to say 8 minutes for the introductory statement and 4 minutes for the conclusion. Are there any members of the Council who wish to make comments on this proposal? I see none. It is so decided. Thank you. It is my honor to welcome Mr. Volker Turk, the High Commissioner for Human Rights, who will make the opening statement. Allow me also to welcome our distinguished speakers, His Excellency Mr. Samuel Mbemba Kabuya Tanda, Minister of Human Rights of the Democratic Republic of the Congo, Ms. Bintu Keita, the Special Representative of the Secretary General and Chief of the United Nations Mission for the Stabilization in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, MONUSCO, Ms. Marie-Thérèse Keita Bokoum, the Chair of the Team of International Experts on the DRC, Mr. Besore René Bagoro, Member of the Team of International Experts on the DRC, and Mr. Dismas Kitenge Senga, President, Chair and co-founder of the Lotus Group. I would also like to extend a warm welcome to His Excellency Mr. Guillaume Gefa, Minister of Justice of the Democratic Republic of the Congo. The speakers list will be closed in 15 minutes, and it is now my honor to give the floor to the High Commissioner for Human Rights for his statement. You have the floor, sir.
Monsieur le Président,
Mr. President, Excellencies, distinguished participants, there are few places in the world which have been confronted with a crisis that is as serious and urgent as that currently faced by the Democratic Republic of the Congo. Monitoring and independent and impartial reports can contribute to precisely establishing the events taking place with a view to establishing truth, justice, and accountability. In the fog of war, propaganda, disinformation, and fear can at times distort and conceal facts. And this is why our fact-finding mission, mandated by this Council in February, is so crucial. The mission has established that all parties involved in the recent and shocking escalation of violence in the provinces of North and South Kivu have committed serious violations and abuses of international human rights law and serious violations of international humanitarian law. The mission noted that the M23, supported by the Rwanda Defense Forces, the RDF, and the armed forces of the DRC, as well as affiliated armed groups, have committed war crimes. The mission has also concluded that the M23 may have committed crimes against humanity. Rwanda and the DRC have responsibilities under international law for their support to known armed groups for having committed serious human rights abuses. Excellencies, M23, supported by the RDF, has committed widespread and systematic abuses and violations in North and South Kivu, aiming to intimidate and pressure the civilian population to build up its own ranks and impose order and security. M23 has summarily executed civilians, especially men, suspected of collaborating with the government forces. It has killed civilians, including children, without any clear reason. In July, members of the M23, as well as persons presumed to be soldiers of the RDF, as well as civilians armed with machetes, massacred hundreds of people, mainly members of the Hutu community, in 4 villages of the Rutshuru. This is one of the most deadly incidents recorded since the resurgence of the M23 in 2022. During raids, which have become almost daily, the M23 has systematically abducted and detained thousands of people. These operations targeted presumed members of the armed forces of the DRC, as well as affiliated groups, but also their families or any person suspected of being connected to them, as well as members of civil society. My team has also confirmed that the M23 committed acts of torture and ill treatment, including sexual violence against detainees. Certain persons were beaten to death or died of their injuries of asphyxia, hunger, or dehydration. According to testimonies, some of the guards were Rwandan. Thousands of civilians, including children, were subsequently sent to so-called training camps where they were subjected to forced labor, to military servitude, and other forms of torture and ill treatment. The fate of hundreds of men, women, and children who were abducted remains unknown. My team has also documented that the armed forces of the DRC deliberately killed civilians following clashes with the armed groups called the Wazalendo. We noted that the Wazalendo managed at least 13 sites where detainees were subjected to torture and ill treatment. According to the mission, Wazalendo groups had recruited children below the age of 18 years, and in some cases below the age of 15 years, to use them as combatants, messengers, guides, or as spies, and that they were holding them arbitrarily in inhumane conditions. Excellencies, for decades, sexual violence has been used as a weapon of war in the Democratic Republic of the Congo. Today, this horror continues. Our mission has established that the majority of parties to the conflict commit large-scale sexual violence. Women and girls, some of whom were only 10 years old, were abducted, subjected to gang rape, reduced to sexual slavery, and humiliated, that is to say, completely dehumanized. Some died as a consequence of these rapes. My team also documented cases of sexual violence against the men, boys, and LGBT persons. Even if though we know that these crimes are only very rarely reported due to stigmatization and fear. My team has identified a pattern of generalized sexual violence committed by the members of the armed forces of the DRC and the Wazalendo during their withdrawal from the front lines. These crimes have left deep scars on the victims. They suffer from mental and psychological trauma, as well as physical trauma, undesired pregnancies, and a risk of lifelong harm to their health, including by infertility or HIV infection. I myself met victims and survivors at the displaced persons camp in Bulengo in 2024, and I saw with my own eyes to what extent sexual violences tear apart family and community links, often forcing survivors to leave their homes. Some women cannot come back from having been raped, fearing stigma. Health services are underfunded and inadequate, which only exacerbates their plight. This matter requires the immediate attention of the international community. Mr. President, the expansion of the M23 has left a trail of destruction in North and South Kivu. It has also had a negative impact on human rights in other parts of the country. The state security forces have been redeployed to combat M23, and other armed groups, including the ADF and the Codeco, have taken advantage of the security vacuum. Between the 1st of June 2024 and the 31st of May 2025, The joint UN Bureau for Human Rights in the DRC has counted over 5,000 violations and abuses of human rights and violations of international humanitarian law throughout the country. These include summary executions, acts of torture and ill treatment, sexual violence, abductions, and arbitrary arrests and detentions. The number of victims of these crimes has increased by 16% during this period compared to the same period last year. After the M23, the ADF, or the second armed group responsible for the majority of abuses, with attacks concentrated in North Kivu and Ituri. In July alone, the ADF killed over 100 civilians in the territory of Irumu in Ituri. In August, they killed at least 52 civilians in Lubero and Beni in North Kivu. During the period under consideration, the majority of parties to the conflict have multiplied the arbitrary detests and arrests of political opponents, as well as threats against human rights defenders, journalists, and civil society activists. The M23 has stepped up threats against judges. Since January 2025, the Joint Office has recorded 568 requests for protection, including 87 made by women. Even in the provinces that are not directly impacted by the armed conflict, such as Mai Ndombe and the Chopo, tensions and intercommunity violence have led to murder, ill treatment, sexual violence, and massive displacements. In Kinshasa and in the Kasai province, my office reports that hate speech and ethnically based attacks have increased against persons presumed to be associated to M23. Excellencies, the violations are continuing as we speak, multiplying the plight of a population that is traumatized by decades of violence. Efforts made over the past few months to achieve peace are encouraging, but they must be made tangible in the field. A genuine ceasefire is urgently necessary. All the parties to the conflict must ensure that they strictly uphold international law and human rights law, as well as international humanitarian law. Rwanda must immediately stop any support to M23 and withdraw its armed forces from the DRC. It must conduct inquiries on allegations of violations and abuse which are attributed to it, and hold the perpetrators accountable. The DRC must ensure that its forces uphold international law. It must stop any form of support to the Wazalendo or other armed groups and ensure that all suspected perpetrators of abuses and violations in DRC be brought to justice. I urge states to exert maximum pressure on Rwanda and the DRC to ensure that they put an end to any support to armed groups known to have committed serious human rights abuses, and to ensure that humanitarian assistance is delivered to all those in need, and that they support the mediation process and the process for an effective peace. A peace founded in human rights implies that the authors, the perpetrators of horrific crimes committed, must be held accountable. It also implies that children traumatized by extreme violence, which they witnessed, must be treated and protected. It also involves recognizing and integrating measures aiming to establish truth and reparations for damage caused. It also involves a clear commitment to prevent the repetition of such atrocities. Excellencies, you have the facts before you. This knowledge must constitute a lever for change in order to ensure that this Council and the international community as a whole take action to put an end to violence, protect victims, and guarantee justice. I urge Member States to ensure adequate support to the Commission of Inquiry entrusted with bringing this essential work forward to establish the foundations of justice for the innumerable victims of the conflict in the DRC. Thank you.
Thank you. I now give the floor to His Excellency Samuel Mbemba who is the Minister. We'll first of all hear some introductory remarks from the Minister of Justice. President, High Commissioner for Human Rights, Madam Special Representative of the Secretary General for the DRC, ambassadors, members of the Council, international experts, please allow me to introduce the government delegation accompanying me. I am joined by the Minister for Human Rights, Samuel Mbenda Kabuyatanda, the Minister for Communication and Media, Patrick Moyaya, Deputy Minister for Foreign Affairs, Aigana Gado Anuela, and I myself am the Minister of State and Minister of Justice. Would like to express our desire to give a serious response to the concerns contained in the report and to hold an interactive dialogue with the Council. I'd like to thank the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights for the high quality report. This confirms the fact that the conflict in the eastern part of our country is an international armed conflict with the confirmed presence of Rwandan troops. It's not an internal conflict. It is being fueled by external aggression led by Rwanda, and which is supporting M23 AFC. The extent of the serious violations of human rights and international humanitarian law will now be described by His Excellency, the Minister for Human Rights. I would like to greet you on behalf of the President of the Democratic Republic of Congo, His Excellency Felix Antoine Tshisekedi, and on behalf of the Congolese government and people. I too would like to congratulate the High Commissioner for his final report on the fact-finding mission, but I would like to point out that the High Commissioner could, on the basis of his own team's findings, have termed his findings as a genocide. Mass systematic crimes are being committed in the Democratic Republic of Congo by Rwanda and its proxies, the M23 and the AFC. There have been massacres of civilians, forced displacement, sexual violence, child conscription, and attacks on civilian infrastructure, in particular schools and hospitals. The most recent dates from July, when almost 300 of our citizens were brutally massacred in the Rutshuru area. There has been a report confirming this by the United Nations, and Human Rights Watch was even more precise with an accurate documentation of the massacre of 140 Hutus. This sows the seeds of ethnic cleansing, which is at the heart of genocide in line with international law. Another serious massacre occurred in Shishisei in November 2022, which was committed by the same forces using the same modus operandi. Furthermore, the government continues to monitor all human rights violations which are still being committed by the occupying forces, which have established a system of governance by crime. Resolution 37.1 of the Council condemns these violations and calls for the immediate withdrawal of the Rwandan forces and their proxies AFC M23, but these demands remain a dead letter up until today. So this is why we are calling for the Independent Commission of Inquiry to be fully established by nominating the investigators so that they can investigate the crimes and put an end to impunity. This will hold perpetrators accountable, and in order to describe the situation on the ground, I would now like to give the floor to the Minister for Communication, who is in the room. Our armed forces are a republican force subject to international law. They are not linked in any way to the FDLR. Quite the opposite. The instructions to the army from the president are strict, and it prevents any form of collusion, and disciplinary measures are taken against anyone who is suspected of collusion. We reiterate our commitment to taking all the necessary measures to counteract any act against Republican values, and we will bring criminal proceedings. We will combat any attempt to distort the picture of a battle between a legitimate armed forces which defends the country and the armed forces of neighboring countries which commit crimes and try to exploit natural resources. There are self-defense groups which protect civilians from massacres because they are being caused by the resurgence of the M23, which is undermining the Nairobi process led by President Kenyatta, which had started the demobilization of all forces. When it comes to hate speech, refugees, or the presidents of FDLR, all of these issues will not be overcome for as long as the Rwandan armed forces continue to support proxies in our country and continue to commit the crimes which have just been mentioned by the Minister for Human Rights. In this context, we have created the Armed Defence Reserve in order to provide a framework for these armed forces, and we vet them rigorously. We would like to express our gratitude to the international team of experts, but we want the focus to be placed on the effective implementation of the Independent Commission of Inquiry. This is the only way in which we will break the cycle of impunity and provide justice to victims. In the east of our country, there is a human tragedy which cannot be ignored, and so we call for urgent action for truth to be established and perpetrators to be held accountable and dignity be restored to victims. It's only through acts and not just by words that we can lay the foundations for lasting peace. Thank you.
Merci. Je donne...
Thank you. I now call on Ms. Bintu Keita for her presentation. President, High Commissioner, Your Excellency, Minister of Justice, Minister for Human Rights, Minister for Communication, Chair of the International Team of Experts on the DRC, Excellencies, Ambassadors, all protocol observed, ladies and gentlemen. Please allow me to congratulate Mr. Samuel Mbemba, the new Minister for Human Rights of the DRC, and to confirm MONUSCO's commitment to cooperate with him in order to protect human rights, transitional justice, and the fight against impunity. I would like to thank the High Commissioner for his presentation on the human rights situation, which continues to deteriorate, particularly affecting women, children, and persons displaced by the conflicts. I hail the work of the fact-finding mission and member states' cooperation for effectively implementing this mandate. I also hail the continuing work of the international team of experts, and I urge the Council to continue to support the team. As part of the Washington and Doha peace process, I urge all parties to respect their commitments and to strive to ensure that human rights and protection of civilians are at the heart of these initiatives. Despite the Security Council resolution calling for an immediate ceasefire, there continues to be confrontations. The level of human rights violations and those of international humanitarian law may undermine any efforts to curb the violence in the east of the country. I'm particularly concerned, I beg your pardon, by the summary executions carried out by M23 in the Rutshuru area, despite progress made as part of the Arrow 2 dialogue in Ituri province, supported by MONUSCO. The security situation gets progressively worse with resumption of hostilities, and the civilian population are paying a high price for this. Over the last 2 months, the Allied democratic forces have increased their attacks against civilians in North Kivu and Ituri, causing the deaths of at least 200 civilians, including women and children. I'm particularly concerned by the situation of victims of sexual violence, particularly women and girls. The number of cases is increasing whilst support for the victims is decreasing. The humanitarian situation is not really improving. Over 8 million displaced persons are finding it difficult to get any humanitarian aid because of insecurity and lack of resources. And at least 3 humanitarians have been killed since the start of this year. President, human rights abuses, particularly more and more cases of arbitrary detention, particularly in the areas under the control of the M23 AFC, is extremely worrying. Civil society activists, human rights defenders and journalists are the target of unprecedented persecution. In the areas under M23 control, despite restrictions facing MONUSCO, MONUSCO continues to host many civilians in its bases in Goma, including civil society activists and human rights defenders. Despite the security challenges, the mission continues to play a crucial role in protecting civilians in the part under the control of the Congolese state. This year, we've strengthened patrols in high-risk areas and made it easier for displaced persons to get back to certain places, and we have been combating impunity. Whilst there's documented hate speech decreasing since the end of last year, we've seen that there has been a worsening security situation in the east of the province. In order to counteract this tendency, the United Nations launched a campaign, Living Better Together, in May to promote social cohesion and provide an enabling environment for peace initiatives.
The nation has significantly undermined our ability to fulfill our human rights mandate. It has led to reduced field deployments, disrupted technical assistance in critical areas such as transitional justice and the fight against impunity, including forensic expertise, and limited support to national institutions. This financial strain threatens to reverse hard-won progress in human rights protection, accountability, and democratic governance. Thank you for your attention. Je vous remercie.
Merci, je donne la parole.
Thank you. I call on Marie-Thérèse Keita-Bokoum for her presentation. President, Minister for Justice, Minister for Human Rights, honourable representatives of the government of the DRC, excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. Mr. Bagoro and myself are going to present our conclusions and recommendations concerning the efforts made by DRC to combat impunity and to implement transitional justice in line with the mandate conferred on us by Resolution 57/34 of the 11th of October 2024. As we've discharged our mandate, we have conducted 3 visits to the country thanks to the continuing and open cooperation with the Congolese authorities, and we'd like to pay tribute to that. We also welcome the invaluable support from the OHCHR, MONUSCO, and other UN structures. As part of our mandate, we have seen the M23 extending its presence, as well as that of the Rwandan Defense Forces and the AFC. This is in the North and South Kivu provinces, which is compounding the armed conflict. This worrying situation comes as MONUSCO starts to downsize and the financial situation of the UN Secretariat remains difficult, and this had an impact on our mandate. When it comes to combating impunity, efforts have been made despite the crisis in the east of the country. 2,500 judges have been recruited, and they're the second wave of the 5,000 to be recruited. This has been ongoing for the past 3 years. When it comes to the crisis in the East, we particularly deplore threats against those working in the justice sector, human rights defenders, victims and witnesses of serious crimes, journalists and traditional leaders. We're worried about the worsening humanitarian situation. We urge all parties of the conflict to respect human rights, international humanitarian law, and take all possible measures to protect civilians, particularly women and children. With this in mind, we urge the government to improve protection measures for judicial officials and other persons affected by the crisis, and we also call upon the UN Security Council to strengthen the mandate of MONUSCO so that it has better capacity to support the government in its efforts to bring security to the country. We remain concerned about the lack of progress in judicial proceedings, particularly the emblematic courses in the crisis linked to the Kamwina militia in Central Kasai. We're worried that feet dragging in the justice sector, along with the challenges faced by the Provincial Commission for Truth, Justice and Reconciliation, will have an impact on reconciliation and lasting peace. We welcome the progress achieved when it comes to forensic medical expertise with the delivery of a complete program for higher education studies in this area and a residence program for forensic doctors. And we call upon the authorities to establish the forensic medical course in Congolese universities. When it comes to traditional justice, some progress has been made at provincial and national levels, including regional initiatives. When it comes to the provinces, setting up the Truth, Justice and Reconciliation Provincial Committee in Central Kasai is continuing as we move towards hearings, and we encourage the government to support them with the necessary staff and funds. At national level, certain important legal documents concerning transitional justice have been finalised, notably the national policy and certain bills on the organisation of courts. We encourage the government and the parliament to work to finalise these different texts so that transitional justice can get up and running. We also say that national consultations to be held to better take into account the concerns of civilians. At a regional level, we welcome progress achieved in the peace progress linked to the East, but there is a lack of accountability and references to the rights to truth, justice, reparations, guarantees of non-repetition. We urge everyone to include transitional justice in peace negotiations and focus on the participation of civil society organisations, women's organisations. We also encourage cross-border judicial cooperation. There are a number of challenges, though, facing transitional justice. There has to be strategic communication around this process, appropriate funding, and there needs to be national coordination mechanisms and the intervention of international partners in the area of transitional justice. Without a shadow of doubt, progress has been made in transitional justice, but a lot still needs to be done, notably when it comes to combating impunity and searching for truth and ensuring that there is no repetition, including at the sub-regional level. This is the only way of holding internal, external perpetrators of serious crimes accountable and providing victims with justice. Lastly, we urge the United Nations, particularly OHCHR, to contribute to the Congolese state's efforts for peace, reconciliation, development. I thank you. Thank you. The list of speakers is now closed. And I would now like to give the floor to the next speaker for his presentation, Mr. Besole René Bagoro.
Alors, je donne la parole à monsieur.
I call on Disma Singha, President of the Human Rights Council, United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights, Madam Special Representative, the Secretary General for the DRC, Minister for Human Rights, honourable members of the Council, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to thank the Human Rights Council for giving me this opportunity to address you as a human rights defender coming from one of the provinces which has been affected by atrocities in the past. This is the town of Kisangani, but I'm also a witness and a frontline actor in the area of human rights and have been so for over 30 years. The DRC is going through one of the most serious moments in its history following the aggression by Rwanda and the protracted and complex armed conflict in the eastern part of the country and the serious human rights abuses and violence perpetrated against civilians. Whilst there are glimmers of hope with the Washington Peace Agreement and the negotiations in Doha, civilians continue to face all forms of violence, whilst we notice that hostilities could resume at any moment. Following the fall of Goma and Bukavu into the hands of the rebels, the security, humanitarian, human rights situation has grown worse. There is targeted violence against young people, particularly forced conscription against young girls and women. This is because they face all forms of sexual violence, and targets also include humanitarians, politicians, state officials, human rights defenders, journalists, workers for international organizations and specific communities who are threatened, attacked, and sometimes killed. Attacks against civilian buildings and murders against non-combatants are numerous, and all these violence against civilians could be likened to international crimes, war crimes. The DRC armed forces and the Wazalendo self-defense forces may have committed atrocities, and they're not taking enough precautions to protect civilians from their attacks. There have been attacks and bombings. There have been internal fighting, which means that they haven't clearly distinguished between combatants and non-combatants. They haven't refrained from committing different forms of sexual violence, torture, cruel, inhuman, degrading treatment. They don't respect prisoners of war. They do not provide for fair trials to soldiers who are charged in war councils, and they do not allow any sort of dissent, despite legal progress in the area of human rights. We see that the civil society intelligence officers, police forces, and Congolese justice systems continue to abuse. There's shrinking civic space. We've seen an escalation in the number of arrests and legal detention in recent months. There's lack of access to custody facilities, and the death penalty has been brought back. And we're worried about that in particular. Combating impunity and serious human rights violations should be the priority of all international bodies, particularly the UN Human Rights Council. The hopes of victims and witnesses of the atrocities have been reignited by the establishment of a special fund and an interinstitutional commission for providing support to victims. These initiatives should be supported, as they should also accompany the establishment of all the pillars of transitional justice and legal reform in order to ensure true rule of law in the DRC. The various peace agreements should also take justice into consideration, because the voices and rights of victims must be heard and respected. There's no peace without justice, and without justice you won't have lasting peace. Congolese civil society supports the conclusions of the fact-finding mission's report, and we believe it's absolutely vital and useful to extend this initiative to other provinces affected by the conflict, including Ituri and Shopo. We shouldn't abandon human rights in the DRC, quite the opposite. We must strengthen this, and this was why I must provide effective and lasting support to the OHCHR through the country office and the Congolese government. We must combat impunity, document violations of international crimes, and call upon the state to step up their efforts to support the operationalization of the Commission of Inquiry, which is supported by Congolese civil society. I would like to inform everybody that thanks to the availability of the interpreters and technical team, we will be able to extend our meeting up until 1:10, so we can start with the first statements. I would like to begin by giving the floor for 5 minutes to Rwanda as a concerned country.
Then before I take the floor for our statement, I want to ensure that I understood well. Did the Minister of Human Rights from the DRC government accuse my delegation and my country of being genocidal in their territory? We want to make sure that this August Assembly is present when these kind of allegations are made on other member states without international legal criteria. And we want to make sure that Mr. President, as you mentioned, the conduct of every member state and participant in this August Assembly should be upheld at the highest level. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I suggest that you take this up bilaterally with the delegation of the DRC and continue with your statement. You have 5 minutes. Thank you.
Didn't hear that.
I suggest that you take up the point you just made bilaterally outside this room with the delegation of the DRC, and that you continue now with your statement. You have 5 minutes. Thank you.
It's a red line, Mr. President, for my country to be allegedly accused of genocide when we know that this is a criteria that international law guides. There's no mechanism that has called for that, and I will not allow for that to be mentioned here in the UN premises and accept that this happens under your watch, Mr. President. I want you to please address this. It's not an allegation that we will accept.
Thank you. If you don't wish to have your statement now, then I give the floor now to the Commission nationale des droits de l'homme de la République démocratique du Congo. Un message par vidéo.
The Human Rights Commission of the Democratic Republic of the Congo by video. Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen, members of the Council, through this channel, as the chairman of the National Human Rights Commission of the Democratic Republic of the Congo, I come to you with an urgent call to your collective conscience and genuine solidarity. In the east of the Democratic Republic of the Congo, and particularly in the provinces of North Kivu, South Kivu, and Ituri, millions of our citizens experience daily terror. Villages are burnt, women are raped, children are recruited forcibly, and civilians are massacred. Fundamental rights are blatantly violated, and this repeatedly and in a planned fashion. These atrocities are carried out by armed groups supported by foreign forces, in particular the AFC/M23, whose connections with Rwanda are robustly documented. We are not speaking here of mere acts of rebellion, but rather of war crimes, of crimes against humanity, and severe violations of international humanitarian law. The analysis of data collected reveals that 61% of violations relate to civil and political right, in particular the right to life and the right to freedom. We solemnly call on this Council to, 1, clearly and firmly condemn these violations, as well as any foreign support to armed groups. 2, that it make the inquiry missions on human rights violations effective. 3, that it support the mechanisms for transitional justice, for reparations for victims, and prosecutions against the perpetrators of various crimes perpetrated in the Democratic Republic of the Congo. And 4th, that it ensure the effective implementation of Security Council Resolution 2773 and the peace agreement in force, those of Washington and of Doha. The National Human Rights Commission works incessantly to document these violations and provide support to victims.
Merci. J'invite maintenant.
Thank you. I now invite interested delegations to ask questions and make comments on statements. I would recall that the speaking time is limited to 1 minute and 30 seconds for each statement, and I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Sweden on behalf of a group of countries.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you to the High Commissioner, the team of international experts, and the fact-finding mission for your reports. I have the honor to make this statement on behalf of the Nordic-Baltic countries. We welcome the recent signing of the peace agreement between the DRC and Rwanda in Washington, the ongoing Doha process, and the African Mediation Initiative. We call on all parties to stand by their commitments, respect the ceasefire, and put an end to violations of international humanitarian law and human rights law, including conflict-related sexual and gender-based violence. The deteriorating humanitarian and security situation is a major concern. We condemn the continued attacks on civilians by the M23 and other armed groups in eastern DRC. Accountability and the rule of law must prevail. The report of the fact-finding mission is crucial in this respect and receives our full support, and the swift operationalization of the COI is essential. We're also closely following the developments in the appeal trial of the murders of UN experts Zaida Catalan and Michael Sharp in Kasai Central in 2017, including the investigation into the disappearance of their 4 Congolese companions. The legal process remains vital and has our full support. Finally, High Commissioner, what can we collectively do now to strengthen accountability and transition?
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of the European Union.
Mr. President, High Commissioner, the EU thanks the fact-finding mission and the team of international experts for their reports. We also commend the technical assistance provided, particularly in the field of forensic medicine, which plays a vital role in supporting accountability efforts and combating impunity. The EU is deeply alarmed by the dramatic escalation of violence in the Eastern Democratic Republic of the Congo and by the FFM's report documenting a pattern of widespread human violations and abuses by all parties, including acts which may constitute war crimes and crimes against humanity. The EU is appalled by the targeted attacks against civilians by all parties. The continuing deterioration of the human rights and humanitarian situation in Eastern Democratic Republic of the Congo warrants the prompt operationalization of the Commission of Inquiry for the DRC. We therefore call on all members to ensure that the OHCHR is adequately funded to carry out the mandates entrusted to it by this Council. High Commissioner, to what extent can OHCHR continue to receive and store relevant information of serious violations and abuses of human rights and international humanitarian law until the Commission of Inquiry is operational? Thank you.
Merci. J'entends.
Thank you. I hear that the delegation of Rwanda is prepared to make its statement. You have the floor.
Mr. President, Rwanda rejects claims that it directs or controls M23 or any other armed group. Under international law, attribution requires concrete, reviewable proof. The report itself cites access constraint and heavy reliance on remote, open source material with no access of data. Such grave allegation must be backed by verifiable evidence. A simple word count of the FFM report reveals an interesting picture. M23 appears 110 times in the report. Rwanda/RDF appears 65 times. FRDC, 42. Wazalendo, 43. FDLR, only 15. And generic armed groups, 23 times. This imbalance shapes a pre-cooked narrative and skews the reality on the ground. It overlooks roughly 260 armed groups that operate actively in the Eastern DRC, in addition of armed foreign involvement alongside FRDC, including private military contractors, mercenaries, and bilateral military forces. This fits a pattern of politicized reporting that vilifies Rwanda without evidence. Rwanda is a UN member state that contributes to peace and stability. We will not accept being continuously subjected to baseless accusation. Rigorous evidence is non-negotiable, and any breach of that standard will be challenged every single time. Rwanda also rejects any involvement in the events reported in Rutshuru in July 2025. Even the report acknowledges shortcomings in verification. Phone records and satellite images alone are not enough, especially when victims are tied to ethnical labels in ways that can inflame tensions. Meanwhile, the reports minimize the verified hate speech and identity-based attacks against the Congolese Tutsi communities that continue, particularly around Minembwe in South Kivu. The pattern is clear and urgent. We ask the Council to treat this as an early warning priority and act now. Mr. President, context matters. The DRC has repeatedly committed to neutralizing the FDLR. Through the Washington Peace Agreement, the African Union, Nairobi, and Luanda process, relevant Security Council tracks, and the MONUSCO mandates. Instead, the DRC-backed FDLR have been equipped, enabled, and give space to recruit, spread genocidal ideology in the Eastern DRC. And this brings me to MONUSCO. 25 years have passed. Billions have been spent. Civilians are still not protected.
you.